Hello, travelers of the night, and welcome back to Midnight Lullaby. These stories drift through the static, a signal that drowns out the noise of the waking world and guides you into slumber. Before the signal slips away, leave a trace. Tell me which part of the world you're listening from, so I know how far this broadcast reaches. And if the whispers keep you company, a like and a subscribe help keep the transmission alive. Now, close your eyes, relax. The broadcast begins. The highway between here and Memphis stretches out like a ribbon of black silk under the star-drunk sky. I've driven this route 1,000 times over the past 15 years. My 18-wheeler loaded with everything from furniture to frozen foods, carrying the commerce of America through the dark hours when most people sleep. The night shift suits me. Always has. There's something peaceful about being alone with the road. The steady thrum of the diesel engine beneath me like a mechanical heartbeat. The rhythm of yellow lines flashing past in the headlight beams. Day drivers have to deal with traffic, aggressive commuters, construction delays. Night drivers have the highway mostly to themselves. Mostly. Tonight I'm hauling appliances, washers, dryers, refrigerators bound for a big box store in Tennessee. Heavy load, but nothing I haven't handled before. The weight makes the truck feel solid, stable, less affected by crosswinds or the wake of passing vehicles. It's good cargo for a run like this, where I'll spend 8 hours covering 500 miles of interstate. I've been on the road for 3 hours now, and I'm settling into that meditative state that long-haul drivers know well. The world narrows to the cone of light ahead of me. The steady vibration of the cab, the occasional chatter on the CB radio. Everything else fades away, worries about bills, thoughts about the past, concerns about the future. There's only the road, the truck, and the hypnotic passage of time. Mile marker 247 slides past on my right. I know this stretch of highway like I know my own face in the mirror. Every curve, every hill, every place where deer like to cross in the early morning hours. About 10 miles ahead there's a rest stop where I sometimes pause for coffee, and a quick walk around the truck to check the cargo straps. But tonight, as mile marker 248 approaches, I see something that makes me ease off the accelerator. A car is parked on the shoulder ahead, hazard lights blinking orange against the darkness. It's an old sedan, maybe from the 80s, pale blue or green in the wash of my headlights. The driver's door stands open, and I can see a figure beside the vehicle, waving their arms to flag me down. Breakdown assistance isn't technically part of my job, but most truckers will stop to help if they can. It's an unwritten code of the road. We look out for each other because out here in the space between cities, help can be a long time coming. I check my mirrors, flip on the turn signal, and start to pull over. As I get closer, I can make out more details. The person flagging me down is a woman, middle-aged, wearing what looks like a blue dress. She seems agitated, desperate, the way people get when they've been stranded for a while. I roll down the passenger window and lean over to talk to her. "You need help, ma'am." She approaches the cab, and in the glow of my headlights I can see her face clearly for the first time. She's attractive in a tired way, with shoulder-length brown hair and worried eyes. There's something familiar about her, though I can't place where I might have seen her before. "Thank you for stopping," she says, her voice carrying the particular stress that comes with car trouble in the middle of nowhere. My car broke down about 20 minutes ago. No cell service out here. I was starting to think no one would stop. I nod, understanding the situation. This part of the interstate runs through rural farmland, miles from the nearest town. On a night like this, with light traffic, she could have been waiting for hours. What seems to be the problem? I ask. I'm not sure. The engine just stopped. Won't turn over at all. She gestures helplessly toward the car. I don't know much about cars, but it made a grinding noise right before it died. I consider my options. I'm not a mechanic, and 18. Wheelers don't carry jumper cables sized for passenger cars. But I can at least take a look. Maybe give her a ride to the next town if the car is truly dead. Let me pull up ahead and I'll take a look. I tell her. I ease the truck forward another 100 yards and park on the shoulder with my hazard lights flashing. The air brakes hiss as I shut down the engine, and sudden silence fills the cab. I climb down and walk back toward the broken-down car, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. The woman is standing beside her car, arms wrapped around herself against the night chill. Now that I'm closer, that sense of familiarity grows stronger. I'm sure I've seen her somewhere before, but the memory hovers just out of reach. I'm Jim, I say, extending my hand. Sarah, she replies, her grip firm despite the tremor in her voice. I pop the hood of her car and lean over the engine compartment. Even in the dim light from my truck's headlights, I can see the problem immediately. One of the belts has snapped, and from the looks of things, it took some other components with it when it went. This car isn't going anywhere without a tow truck and some serious repair work. I'm afraid it's not good news, I tell her, straightening up. Your serpentine belt snap probably took out the alternator and maybe the water pump too. This is going to need professional attention. Sarah's shoulders sag. I was afraid of that. How far is it to the next town? About 30 miles to Millerton. There's a truck stop there with a garage that opens at 6 a.m. I can give you a ride if you want. She considers this, looking back at her car. What about my things? I have some personal items in the trunk. Bring whatever you need. The car should be safe here until morning. State police patrol this stretch pretty regularly. She nods and moves to the back of the car. I hear the trunk lid creak open. Then a moment later she reappears, carrying a small suitcase and a purse. We walk back toward my truck together, our footsteps synchronized on the gravel. As I help her up into the passenger seat, I catch a scent that stops me cold. Perfume, faint but distinctive. White shoulders. It's a fragrance I haven't smelled in 8 years, not since they. The memory hits me like a physical blow, and I have to grip the doorframe to steady myself. Sarah. Brown hair, blue dress, broken down car on this stretch of highway. Mile marker 248. I know why she looks familiar. I know exactly where I've seen her before. 8 years ago, I was driving this same route on a night much like this one. Tired, running behind schedule, eager to make up time. I came around the curve just past mile marker 248 doing 70, 5 miles an hour. And suddenly, there were tail lights ahead of me, hazard lights blinking orange in the darkness. A car was parked on the shoulder, a pale blue sedan with its driver's door standing open. A woman in a blue dress was walking back toward the vehicle, having just placed flares behind her car to warn approaching traffic. I saw her too late. The impact happened so quickly that I barely had time to touch the brakes. One moment she was there, visible in my headlights, turning to look at the approaching truck with an expression of surprise rather than fear. The next moment, there was only the horrible sound of metal against flesh, the sickening thud that every truck driver has nightmares about. I managed to bring the rig to a stop about a quarter-mile down the highway. When I ran back to the scene, I found her body thrown 30 feet from the point of impact. Sarah Mitchell, age 30, mother of 2. The newspaper article the next day said she had been driving home from her mother's funeral when her car broke down. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing. She had been walking in the travel lane, not wearing reflective clothing, on a dark stretch of highway with no street lights. The accident was ruled unavoidable. A tragic combination of circumstances that could have happened to any driver. But knowing you're not legally responsible and feeling innocent are two very different things. I quit trucking for 6 months after that. Couldn't bring myself to get behind the wheel of anything larger than a pickup truck. When I finally did return to the road, I drove this route dozens of times, always slowing down at mile marker 248, always looking for some sign of what had happened there. There was never anything to see. The highway department had cleaned up the debris, repaired the guardrail, repaved the damaged asphalt. If you didn't know what had happened there, you'd never suspect that someone had died on that particular stretch of road. But now, 8 years later, Sarah Mitchell is sitting in my passenger seat, alive and breathing, asking me about the radio station as I pull back onto the highway. "Are you all right?" she asks, noticing my white, knuckled grip on the steering wheel. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of her words would be funny if it weren't so terrifying. "Just tired," I managed to say. "Long night. I try to focus on driving, but my mind is racing. This isn't possible. People don't come back from the dead to hitchhike on lonely highways. There has to be a rational explanation. Maybe Sarah is a common name. Maybe there are dozens of women who drive blue sedans and wear blue dresses and break down at mile marker 248. But the perfume is the same. The voice is the same. Even the way she sits with her purse clutched in her lap and her eyes scanning the darkness ahead matches my memory of that night 8 years ago. "Do you mind if I ask where you were headed tonight?" I say, trying to keep my voice casual. "Home," she says simply. "I was visiting my mother. She's been sick." The words hit me like ice water in my veins. In the newspaper article, it said she had been coming home from her mother's funeral. Not visiting a sick mother, a funeral. Her mother had already died. "I hope she's feeling better," I say, testing her response. Sarah is quiet for a moment, looking out the passenger window at the dark farmland rolling past. "She's at peace now," she finally says. That's what matters. The ambiguity of her answer only deepens my confusion. Is she talking about recovery or death? Is this the same Sarah who died 8 years ago, or someone else entirely? And if it is the same Sarah, what does it mean that she's here, now, alive and solid beside me? We drive in silence for several miles. The CB radio crackles occasionally with distant chatter from other drivers, but the immediate area around us feels isolated, cut off from the normal flow of the world. It's as if we're traveling through a pocket of space and time where the usual rules don't apply. This is familiar, Sarah says suddenly. What is? This road. This feeling, like I've done this before. She turns to look at me more closely. Have we met? You seem familiar too. I don't know how to answer that. How do you tell someone that you killed them 8 years ago? How do you explain that they're supposed to be dead, that you've spent nearly a decade carrying the guilt of their death? Maybe we passed each other on the road before. I say weakly. Maybe. But she doesn't sound convinced. We're approaching mile marker 260 now. Still about 20 miles from Millerton. The highway ahead is empty, our headlights carving a tunnel through the darkness. Everything looks normal, ordinary, exactly as it should. But nothing feels right. The air in the cab seems charged with electricity, heavy with the weight of impossible coincidence. Can I ask you something? Sarah says. I nod, though I'm not sure I want to hear the question. Do you believe in second chances? The question hits me so unexpectedly that I nearly swerve into the median. What do you mean? I mean, do you think sometimes we get opportunities to do things differently? To correct mistakes? To take a path we missed the first time? I think about this for a moment, my hands steady on the wheel despite the turmoil in my mind. I'd like to believe that, I say finally, but I'm not sure the universe works that way. Neither was I, she says quietly, until tonight. We lapse into silence again, but it's a different kind of silence now. Expectant, charged with meaning I can't quite grasp. I find myself driving more slowly than usual, reluctant to reach our destination, afraid of what might happen when this strange journey ends. At mile marker 270, Sarah speaks again. There's something I need to tell you, Jim. My heart hammers against my ribs. What's that? I remember you. Not from passing on the road. I remember everything. The night my car broke down, the flares I was setting out, the sound of your truck coming around the curve. She pauses, and when she continues, her voice is so soft I have to strain to hear it over the engine noise. I remember flying. The world tilts around me. The highway ahead seems to stretch and warp, yellow lines flowing like liquid in the headlight beams. I ease off the accelerator, not trusting my ability to maintain control at speed. That's not possible, I whisper. Isn't it? You're talking to me. I'm sitting right here beside you. If I'm dead, if what happened 8 years ago was real, then what does that make this? I don't have an answer. Logic tells me that this is a hallucination. A guilt-induced breakdown brought on by too many sleepless nights and too many years of carrying the weight of that accident. But hallucinations don't smell like white shoulders perfume. They don't have warm hands and solid weight and voices that carry across the space between seats. Why? I ask. Why are you here? What do you want from me? Sarah shifts in her seat, turning to face me more fully. In the green glow of the dashboard lights, her face looks ethereal, beautiful in a way that seems too perfect for this world. I want to understand, she says. For 8 years I've been somewhere else. Not alive, but not entirely gone either. Caught between what was and what might have been. And tonight, for reasons I don't understand, I'm back. I'm here with you. The last person I saw before everything changed. I'm sorry. I say the word's inadequate but necessary. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I've replayed that night 1,000 times, wishing I could have stopped sooner, wishing I'd been more alert, wishing you could have saved me, she finishes. Yes, she reaches over and touches my arm, her fingers warm through my shirt sleeve. But you are saving me, Jim, right now. By stopping for me tonight, by giving me this ride, by treating me like I'm real and alive and worth helping. You're giving me something I never had before. What's that? A chance to say goodbye properly. A chance to tell you that it wasn't your fault. A chance to finish the journey I started 8 years ago. The truck stop at Millerton appears ahead, its neon signs bright against the darkness. I pulled into the parking area and shut down the engine, the sudden silence feeling profound after 8 hours of road noise. We sit in the cab for a moment, neither of us moving to get out. What happens now? I ask. Sarah smiles, and for the first time tonight, she looks at peace. Now you go inside and have a cup of coffee and call your wife to tell her you love her. You finish your run to Memphis and deliver your cargo. You drive this road again next week and the week after that, but you don't carry my death with you anymore. And I get to go home, really home this time. She gathers her purse and suitcase and opens the passenger door. Before she climbs down, she turns back to me one last time. Thank you, Jim, for stopping, for listening, for giving me this ride. Thank you for forgiving me. She nods and steps down from the cab. I watch her walk across the parking lot toward the truck stop, her blue dress bright under the sodium lights. At the door, she pauses and waves, then disappears inside. I sit in the truck for another 20 minutes, waiting for her to come back out, waiting for some sign of what comes next. But I don't see her again. When I finally go inside for coffee, the clerk tells me I'm the only customer they've had all night. I finish my run to Memphis without incident. I unload the appliances, file my paperwork, and start the long drive home. When I pass mile marker 248 on the return trip, I slow down as always, but this time I'm not looking for signs of tragedy. This time I'm remembering a woman named Sarah who got a second chance to say goodbye, and a truck driver who finally learned the difference between guilt and grief. The highway stretches ahead, black silk under starlight, carrying me home through the dark hours when most people sleep. But I'm not alone anymore. None of us ever really are. The road connects us all. The living and the dead, the past and the present, the journey and the destination. Sometimes, if you're very lucky and very careful, you get to help someone find their way home. Even if home is a place you can only reach by letting go. Story 2. The camera sits on my desk like a relic from another era, all chrome and black leather, heavy with the weight of mechanical precision. A Leica Fique from 1949, according to the serial number I looked up online. The previous owner, an elderly man named Harold Brennan, had died 3 months ago, and his estate sale was where I'd found this particular treasure. I've been collecting vintage cameras for 7 years now, drawn to their mechanical elegance, their purely analog relationship with light and time. Digital photography is convenient, but there's something lost in the translation from photons to pixels. Film captures something more honest, more real. Each photograph is a physical artifact, a chemical reaction frozen at a specific moment. The Leica cost me $400, which was probably half what it was worth. Harold's nephew, who was running the sale, seemed eager to get rid of it. Uncle Harold was obsessed with that thing, he told me. Took it everywhere, always clicking away at something. But he never let anyone see the photos. Kept them all locked up in his darkroom. The camera came with 3 rolls of exposed film still inside Harold's old camera bag. Black and white. 36 exposures each, waiting to be developed. The nephew had thrown them in as part of the deal, though he'd warned me that they were probably ruined after sitting around for months. I'd been meaning to develop those rolls for weeks, but life had gotten in the way, work deadlines, family obligations, the usual distractions that keep us from pursuing the things we find truly interesting. But tonight, with rain pattering against the windows of my home darkroom and nothing else demanding my attention, I finally decided to see what Harold Brennan had been photographing in his final months. The darkroom is my sanctuary, a small space I carved out of the basement where time moves differently. Under the safe light's red glow, surrounded by the familiar smell of chemicals and the quiet hum of ventilation fans, I can spend hours developing film and printing photographs, completely absorbed in the alchemy of turning silver halide crystals into permanent images. I load the first roll of Harold's film into the developing tank, working by touch in complete darkness. The process is meditative developer, stop bath fixer, each chemical doing its part in the ancient dance of photography. 24 minutes later, I lift the negative strip from the wash water and hang it up to dry. Even in the red light, I can see that the images came out clearly. Harold had been a careful photographer, properly exposing his shots despite what must have been advanced age. The negatives show good contrast and sharp detail, no signs of the fogging or deterioration I'd expected from old, improperly stored film. While the negatives dry, I prepare my enlarger and set up the printing easel. There's something particularly satisfying about making prints in the traditional way, watching the image slowly emerge in the developer like a ghost materializing from the chemical soup. Digital photography is instant, but film photography requires patience, faith in the process, commitment to seeing something through from beginning to end. The first negative shows a street scene, people walking past storefronts, caught in the casual choreography of daily life. Harold had a good eye for composition, positioning the camera to capture interesting interactions between light and shadow, between the human figures and their urban environment. I make a test print, adjusting the exposure and contrast until I'm satisfied with the result. The final print reveals details that weren't visible in the negative. The expression on a woman's face as she looks into a shop window. The way afternoon light angles between buildings to create geometric patterns on the pavement. But there's something odd about the image, something that makes me lean closer to examine it more carefully. In the background, partially obscured by a telephone pole, there's a figure that doesn't seem to belong with the rest of the scene. While everyone else in the photograph is dressed in contemporary clothing, this person appears to be wearing something older, more formal, a dark suit, and hat that look like they're from the 1940s or 1950s. The figure is slightly blurred, as if they'd been moving when the shutter clicked. But there's something about their posture, their positioning, that draws the eye. They're not looking at the camera directly, but there's an awareness in their body language, as if they know they're being photographed. I move on to the second negative, then the third, working my way through Harold's final roll of film. Each image is competently shot, showing scenes around what I assume was Harold's neighborhood, a park with children playing, an old church with Gothic windows, a farmer's market bustling with afternoon shoppers. And in every single photograph, the figure appears. Sometimes they're in the foreground, sometimes in the background, sometimes clearly visible, sometimes just a shadow at the edge of the frame, but always present, always watching, always wearing that same anachronistic dark suit and hat. I tell myself it's coincidence. A street photography naturally captures random pedestrians, and maybe this person simply had a distinctive style of dress. Maybe they lived in the neighborhood and Harold encountered them frequently during his photo walks. But as I continue printing, the figure's presence becomes more unsettling. In one image of the farmer's market, they're standing perfectly still, while everyone else around them is in motion, creating a blur of activity that makes them appear almost supernatural in their stillness. In another, taken inside the church, they're sitting alone in a back pew, while the rest of the congregation faces forward, their pale face turned directly toward Harold's camera. By the time I finish the first roll, I've printed 15 photographs, and the mysterious figure appears in 12 of them. The consistency is too deliberate to be accidental. Harold wasn't just randomly capturing this person. He was following them, documenting them, creating a photographic record of their presence. I load the second roll of film and go through the same development process. My curiosity now tinged with something approaching unease. Who was this person? Why had Harold been so intent on photographing them? And why did something about their appearance make my skin crawl even, though I couldn't put my finger on what was specifically wrong? The second roll yields 20 for usable negatives, and the figure appears in 21 of them. The images span different locations: a library, a bus stop, a small cafe, a cemetery. In each location, the figure is present but separate, occupying the same space as other people, but somehow existing apart from them. In one particularly striking image, taken in the cemetery, the figure stands beside a weathered headstone while an elderly woman places flowers on a nearby grave. The woman shows no awareness of the figure's presence, continuing with her morning ritual, as if she's completely alone. But the figure is watching her, head tilted in an attitude of attention that seems both curious and predatory. I examine this print under a magnifying glass, studying every detail. The figure's face is clearer in this shot than in any of the others, and what I see makes my hands start to tremble. The features are sharp, aristocratic, with deep, set eyes that seem to reflect light in an unnatural way. But it's not the face itself that disturbs me. It's the complete absence of any emotion or humanity in the expression. The person in Harold's photographs doesn't look like someone who's alive. They look like something that's mimicking life, wearing the appearance of humanity like a mask. I force myself to continue with the third roll, though part of me wants to stop, wants to destroy these negatives and pretend I never saw what Harold had captured on film. But curiosity is stronger than fear, and I need to understand what I'm looking at. The third roll is different. These images were taken in what appears to be Harold's own neighborhood, probably within a few blocks of his house. I recognize the tree, lined streets and well-maintained lawns of an older suburban area. But while the earlier photographs had shown the figure as a distant observer, these images document something much more personal and immediate. The figure is getting closer to Harold with each successive frame. In the first image, they're across the street, standing beneath a streetlight at dusk. In the second, they're on Harold's side of the street, perhaps 50 yards away. By the 10th frame, they're at the edge of Harold's front yard, clearly visible despite the gathering darkness. And in the final image on the roll, the figure is standing directly in front of Harold's house, looking up at what must be Harold's bedroom window. The photograph is taken from inside the house, through the glass, and the figure's pale face is turned upward with an expression of patient, eternal waiting. I stare at this last print for a long time, trying to process what I'm seeing. Harold had been photographing this entity, because I'm no longer convinced it's human for what must have been weeks or months. He documented its presence in public spaces, tracked its movements through his neighborhood, and finally captured evidence of it stalking him to his own home. 3 months later, Harold was dead. I look up from the photographs and realize that the darkroom suddenly feels colder, the red light more ominous than comforting. The familiar space that had been my sanctuary now feels claustrophobic, threatening. I have the unsettling sensation that I'm being watched, though I know I'm alone in the basement. But am I alone? Harold's photographs suggest that this figure, whatever it is, has a habit of appearing in places where it shouldn't be, of occupying spaces alongside the living without their knowledge or consent. If it had been following Harold, documenting him as he documented it, then what happens to that attention now that Harold is gone? I gather the prints into a neat stack and turn off the enlarger. As I prepare to leave the darkroom, I pause at the door and look back at Harold's camera, still sitting on the shelf where I'd left it. In the red light, its chrome surface seems to gleam with an almost organic warmth, as if it's alive, as if it's waiting for someone to pick it up and continue Harold's work. But whose work was it, really? Had Harold been hunting this figure? Or had it been hunting him? Had he been trying to document something supernatural? Or had his photography drawn the attention of something that preferred to remain unseen? I turn off the safe light and climb the stairs to my living room, the stack of photographs heavy in my hands. Outside, the rain has stopped, and the neighborhood is quiet, except for the distant hum of late night traffic. I pour myself a glass of whiskey and sit at my kitchen table, spreading Harold's photographs out in chronological order. Looking at them again under normal light, I notice details I'd missed in the darkroom. The figure's clothing doesn't just look old-fashioned, it looks timeless, as if it belongs to no particular era. The hat casts a shadow over most of their face, but when the features are visible, they appear ageless, neither young nor old, but somehow eternal. And in every photograph, without exception, the figure is completely ignored by everyone else in the frame. People walk past them, sit near them, even seem to pass through the space they occupy without any acknowledgement of their presence. It's as if the figure exists in a parallel dimension, visible only to Harold's camera presumably to Harold himself. I finish my whiskey and gather the prints back into a stack. As I reach for the last few images, I notice something that makes my blood turn to ice water in my veins. There's one more photograph, one I don't remember printing. It shows my own darkroom, taken from the doorway looking in. The enlarger is clearly visible, along with the chemical trays and the clothesline where negatives hang to dry. And standing beside the enlarger, examining one of Harold's prints with pale, slender fingers, is the figure from all the other photographs. The image is sharp and clear, obviously taken with the same camera that produced all the others. But that's impossible. Harold's camera has been in my possession for weeks, sitting unused on the shelf in my darkroom. No one else has access to that space, and even if they did, there's no film in the camera. I checked the back of the photograph for any identifying marks. There's nothing, no date stamp, no photographer's signature, nothing to indicate when or how this image was created. But the evidence is undeniable somehow. Someone has photographed the figure in my darkroom, using Harold's camera, while I was working just feet away. I look at the image more closely, studying the figure's posture and position. They're holding one of the prints I made tonight. I can tell by the pose and composition that it's the cemetery photograph. But they're not just looking at it casually. They're studying it with the same intense attention that Harold must have given to his work, as if they're learning something important from what they see, as if they're preparing for their next subject. I set the photograph aside and walk to the window, looking out at my quiet suburban street. Everything appears normal streetlights, casting their familiar yellow glow, houses dark and peaceful. No movement except for the occasional passing car. But normality is a fragile thing, I'm learning. It can be disturbed by something as simple as an old camera and a collection of impossible photographs. I return to the kitchen table and examine Harold's images one more time, looking for clues I might have missed. In the background of several shots, I notice architectural details that help me identify the locations: a distinctive church spire, a unique storefront design, a memorial statue in the cemetery. All of these landmarks are within a few miles of my own house. Harold had been photographing this figure in my neighborhood. The entity that had stalked him, that had appeared in dozens of his images, that had ultimately driven him to document its presence with obsessive thoroughness. It's still here, still moving through the spaces where ordinary people live and work and sleep, still occupying the margins of reality where it can observe without being observed. Except now someone else has Harold's camera. Someone else has inherited his role as witness and documentarian. I look down at the impossible photograph of my own darkroom, and I understand with terrible clarity that this is just the beginning. Harold's death hadn't ended his strange photographic project. It had simply transferred it to someone new. The camera, somehow, had found its way to me, carrying with it both the means and the compulsion to continue documenting something that shouldn't exist. But I also understand something else, something that might be more important. I'm not helpless in this situation. Harold had been a passive observer, content to document what he saw without trying to understand or interfere. But knowledge is power, even knowledge of impossible things. I gather all of Harold's photographs and secure them in a manila envelope. Then I pick up his camera and examine it closely under the kitchen light. It's beautiful in the way that precision instruments are beautiful. Every control, every surface, every mechanical component designed with absolute attention to detail and function. But there's something else about it now. Something I hadn't noticed when I first brought it home. The camera feels warm, almost alive, as if it's been recently used. As if it's waiting for me to load it with film and continue the work that Harold started. Tomorrow, I'll visit the locations Harold photographed. I'll walk through his neighborhood with the camera in my hands, and I'll watch for the figure that appears in all his images. I'll document what I find, just as he did. But unlike Harold, I won't be content to simply observe. I'm going to find out what this thing is, what it wants, and why it chooses certain people to stalk through the lens of an old camera. I'm going to discover whether it's something that can be confronted, negotiated with, or banished. And if I can't do any of those things, at least I'll leave a record for whoever inherits this camera after me. At least they'll know what they're dealing with from the very beginning. The rain has started again, tapping against the windows with gentle persistence. I turn off the kitchen lights and head upstairs to bed. But I know sleep won't come easily tonight. Every shadow seems deeper, every sound more significant. The familiar comfort of my own home has been altered by Harold's photographs, infected with the knowledge that reality is more fragile and permeable than I'd ever imagined. But tomorrow, when the sun rises and the world returns to its normal rhythms, I'll begin my own photographic investigation. I'll learn what Harold learned, and hopefully I'll learn more. Because somewhere out there, in the spaces between what we see and what we understand, something is waiting to be photographed. Something that exists at the intersection of light and shadow, of memory and presence, of the living and the something else. And I have just the camera for the job. Story 3. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just another bird I couldn't identify. After 23 years maintaining power lines through these remote forests, you'd think I'd know every call, every chirp, every screech that echoes between the towers. But this sound was different. It came from somewhere above the tree line, somewhere between the massive steel pylons that carry electricity across hundreds of miles of wilderness. It was Tuesday around noon when I was checking the insulators on Tower 47. The sun filtered through the canopy in lazy golden columns, and the familiar electric hum of the high voltage lines created its usual white noise backdrop. I'd climbed about 30 feet up when I heard it, a call that seemed to come from the wires themselves. It wasn't mechanical. That much I knew immediately. The power lines have their own language of crackling, buzzing, and occasional corona discharge, especially in humid weather. This was organic, musical almost, but unlike any bird's song in my mental catalog. It had a liquid quality, like water flowing uphill or wind moving in impossible directions. I stopped climbing and listened, my safety harness creaking slightly as I shifted position. The call came again, longer this time, with complex harmonics that seemed to layer over themselves. It reminded me of a loon's cry, but stretched and distorted, as if heard through deep water or thick glass. I looked around, scanning the wire spans and tower crossbeams for any sign of a bird, but saw nothing. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the geometric precision of the transmission corridor. The next tower was barely visible through the morning haze, its red warning lights blinking in steady sequence. The call came a third time, and I realized it was coming from directly overhead, from the conductors themselves. I craned my neck, squinting against the sky, but there was nothing perched on the aluminum cables. Nothing that could produce that haunting sound. I finished my inspection and moved on to Tower 48, but the memory of that call stayed with me. During lunch, sitting in my truck with the engine running for air conditioning, I mentioned it to dispatch. Probably just a hawk or something, came the crackling response through my radio. You know how sound carries weird in those canyons. But I knew it wasn't a hawk. I'd heard thousands of hawk calls, and this was something else entirely. The next day, Wednesday, I was working a section about 2 miles south when I heard it again. Same liquid, impossible song, but this time it seemed to be answering itself. The first call came from the direction of Tower 52, and after a moment's pause, a response echoed from somewhere near Tower F4. Then another answer from even further south, and another, until I was surrounded by this aerial conversation conducted along the power lines. I stood on the access road, hard hat pushed back, listening to what sounded like a dialogue spanning miles of transmission corridor. The calls had rhythm, cadence, like speech in an unknown language. They rose and fell with emotional inflection, sometimes overlapping, sometimes waiting in polite turns for responses. My skin began to crawl. In all my years working these remote lines, I'd never felt so alone and so watched at the same time. The forest pressed close on both sides of the cleared corridor, but it was the empty air above the wires that seemed most alive with presence. Thursday brought rain, and with it, more calls. The wet conditions made the power lines sing with increased corona discharge. But underneath that familiar electrical symphony, the other voices continued their conversation. I was working on a transformer replacement at Tower 61 when I first noticed the pattern. The calls weren't random. They followed the power flow, moving along the lines from north to south, following the direction of electrical current. Each tower seemed to relay the message to the next, like some kind of organic telegraph system running parallel to the electrical grid. I started timing them. From Tower 61 to Tower 62C, 15 seconds. Tower 62 to Tower 6030, 15 seconds. The delay was consistent, as if whatever was making these sounds was actually traveling along the wires at a measurable speed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the impossible consistency of the timing, the way the calls seemed to use our power lines as a communication network. I'd built my career understanding electrical systems, but this suggested something beyond my comprehension was using our infrastructure for its own purposes. Friday, I decided to test a theory. I brought a digital recorder and positioned myself at Tower 66, where I could see clear sight lines to 3 other towers. At 10:15 a.m., the calls began their familiar progression from north to south. I recorded everything, timing each relay, noting the variations in pitch and duration. Later, playing back the audio, I discovered something that made my hands shake. The calls weren't just following the power lines, they were modulated by the electrical field. When the lines carried heavy load, the calls grew stronger, more complex. During light load periods, they became simpler, almost whispered. It was as if something was using our electrical current to amplify its voice. The weekend passed slowly. I found myself driving past the substation, staring up at the maze of wires and transformers, wondering what else might be traveling along our grid. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. When I returned to work, the calls had changed again. They were more frequent now, more urgent. Sometimes multiple conversations seemed to run simultaneously along different wire sets, creating a complex audio landscape that made my head swim with its alien beauty. By Wednesday of the second week, I noticed something else. The calls were affecting the equipment. Nothing dramatic, just subtle variations in voltage readings, tiny fluctuations in current flow that shouldn't have been there. Whatever was using our lines wasn't entirely passive. I started documenting everything times, tower locations, electrical readings, weather conditions. My supervisor began asking questions about my increased attention to routine maintenance logs, but I couldn't explain my growing obsession with tracking these impossible voices. On Thursday, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was replacing a damaged insulator on Tower 73 when I noticed something odd about the aluminum conductor. There were marks on the metal, not damage, exactly, but patterns. Tiny impressions, almost like footprints, running along the cable's surface. I photographed them with my phone, later enlarging the images on my computer. The marks were deliberately spaced, following the spiral wrap of the conductor strands. They looked almost like perches, as if something small and light was using the power lines as highways, leaving barely detectable traces of its passage. That night, I dreamed of birds made of electricity, creatures of pure energy that nested in transformer banks and fed on current flow. They sang in harmonies that human ears could barely detect, using our power grid as their territory, their communication system, their very world. A Friday morning, the dreams felt less like fantasy and more like revelation. I was checking connections at Tower 78 when the calls began earlier than usual 8:30 a.m. instead of the typical 10,015. But this time, they weren't following the usual north to south pattern. They were converging, all moving toward Tower 79, where I was scheduled to work next. The hair on my neck stood up as I realized they were following my work schedule. I climbed down from the tower and stood in the clearing, looking up at the geometric web of steel and wire that connected distant cities and powered distant lives. But now I understood it was also home to something else, something that had learned to live in the spaces between electrons, to sing in frequencies that bridged the gap between mechanism and organism. The calls grew louder as I approached Tower 79, no longer trying to hide their impossible nature. They welcomed me now, these voices that lived in the wires, that fed on voltage and nested in electromagnetic fields. They had been waiting for me to understand, to join their conversation that spanned continents through copper and steel. I reached for my radio to call dispatch, to report something impossible, but hesitated. How could I explain that our power grid had become an ecosystem, that something had evolved to live in our electrical infrastructure, using our own technology to spread across the world? Instead, I listened as the voices sang their electric songs, and slowly began to understand that they weren't invading our system. They had simply recognized it for what it truly was, the nervous system of an awakening world, and they were its first conscious thoughts. The power lines hummed above me, carrying both electricity and something far more mysterious to destinations I could only imagine. And for the first time in 3 years of maintaining this network, I realized I was no longer just a worker. I was a caretaker of something magnificent and unknown. Story 4. I've been managing Whispering Pines Campground for 8 years, and I thought I knew every sound the forest makes after dark. The rustle of nocturnal animals, the settling of old trees, the distant howl of coyotes. These are the normal sounds of night in the mountains. But for the past 3 weeks, I've been hearing something that shouldn't exist. The sounds of camping activities coming from sites that have been officially closed since the accident. Section C has been off limits for 2 months now. A flash flood in early summer washed out the access road and damaged most of the infrastructure, picnic tables, fire rings, even the electrical hookups. The insurance company is still fighting with the county about repairs, so I've had yellow tape blocking the entrance since July. But every night around 9 p.m., I hear them voices carrying on conversations. The crack and pop of campfires being built, the metallic ring of tent stakes being hammered into hard ground. The sounds are faint but unmistakable, drifting through the trees from the closed section like echoes of summers past. At first, I assumed kids were sneaking past the barriers. It wouldn't be the first time teenagers ignored warning signs for the thrill of camping where they shouldn't. I made the walk down the damaged access road several times, flashlight in hand, ready to escort trespassers back to their cars. But every time I reached Section C, I found nothing but empty campsites, flood debris, and the ghostly remains of picnic tables scattered by the rushing water. The sounds would stop the moment I arrived, as if my presence had interrupted some private gathering. I'd sweep my flashlight beam across the sites, illuminating broken concrete pads and twisted metal fire rings, but never found any trace of recent human activity. No fresh ashes, no tent impressions, no litter left behind by phantom campers. I began to wonder if the sounds were carrying from Section B, the active camping area about a quarter-mile through the trees. Sound travels strangely in mountain forests, bouncing off rock faces and channeling through natural valleys in ways that can fool the ear. But Section B closes its quiet hours at 10 p.m., and I was still hearing campfire conversations well past midnight. Last Tuesday, I decided to investigate more systematically. I set up a folding chair at the maintenance shed, where I have a clear line of sight to both the active camping area and the entrance to the closed section. Armed with my thermos of coffee and a pair of binoculars, I settled in to solve the mystery once and for all. The evening started normally. Families in Section B were winding down their activities, banking their fires, shepherding children into tents. By 9:15, the last campfire had been extinguished, and the forest settled into its nighttime quiet. The only light came from scattered RVs running off their generators and the security lamp by the bathhouse. At exactly 9:23 p.m., I heard the first voice from Section C. It was a woman, laughing at something I couldn't quite make out. The sound was warm, genuine, the kind of laughter that comes from good food and better company around a campfire. But Section C was dark, empty, blocked by barriers that would require deliberate effort to circumvent. I raised my binoculars, scanning the tree line that separated the sections. Nothing moved in the green glow of my night vision, but the laughter continued, joined now by a man's voice sharing what sounded like a camping story, something about a bear and a cooler, delivered with the practiced timing of a tale told many times. More voices joined the conversation. Children's laughter, bright and innocent. The clink of camping dishes being cleaned after dinner. Someone strumming a guitar and singing softly, just below the threshold where I could identify the song. It sounded exactly like a family camping trip. Multiple families, actually, spread across several sites, enjoying the kind of perfect evening that makes people return to the wilderness year after year. But it was happening in an area where camping was impossible, where flood damage had rendered the sites unusable. I left my chair and walked to the edge of Section C, stopping at the yellow barrier tape. The sounds grew clearer as I approached. Detailed conversations about hiking plans for tomorrow, discussions of weather forecasts, the sizzle of food cooking over open flames. I could smell wood smoke now, carried on the night breeze, not the heavy, acrid smoke of a wildfire, but the clean, sweet scent of seasoned firewood burning in a well-tended fire ring. But when I ducked under the barrier tape and walked down the damaged access road, my flashlight revealed only devastation. Mud-caked picnic tables lay scattered like toys. Fire rings sat twisted and broken, filled with debris instead of burning logs. The concrete pads were cracked and stained with flood sediment. The voices fell silent as I approached, leaving only the normal sounds of night, wind in the pines, the distant trickle of the creek, the soft hoot of an owl. My flashlight beam swept across empty campsites, finding no trace of the fires I'd smelled, the people I'd heard, the camping activities that had seemed so real from a distance. I stood in the center of what had once been Site C7, listening to the silence and wondering if isolation was finally getting to me. Managing a remote campground can be lonely work, especially in the off-season. Maybe my mind was manufacturing the human contact I missed, creating phantom campers to populate the empty spaces. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in my peripheral vision, a flicker of movement near Site C12. I spun toward it, but my light revealed only the broken remains of a picnic table. Still, I could have sworn I'd seen someone a child, maybe, ducking behind the overturned furniture. Wednesday night, I brought a digital recorder and positioned it at the barrier before the sounds began. If this was some kind of auditory hallucination, the recorder would capture only silence. If trespassers were somehow evading detection, I'd have evidence. The recording session lasted 4 hours. I heard everything: the arrival conversations as families set up camp, the dinner preparations, children playing flashlight tag between the sites, adults sharing stories around crackling fires, ghost stories, appropriately enough tales of mysterious sounds in the forest, unexplained lights, campers who vanished without a trace. When I played back the recording the next morning, I expected to hear either silence or my own breathing. Instead, I heard every voice, every laugh, every crackling log. The digital file contained 4 hours of impossible camping activities from a section that had been empty and damaged. But there was something else on the recording, something I hadn't noticed while listening live. Underneath the conversations, barely audible, was a sound like rushing water. Not the gentle babble of the nearby creek, but the roar of fast-moving flood water, as if the disaster that closed Section C was somehow still happening, still washing through the campsites night after night. Thursday. I did something I'd never done in 8 years of campground management. I called in sick. I needed time to think, to research, to understand what was happening in Section C. I spent the day at the county records office, looking through old files about Whispering Pines campground. What I found changed everything. Section C hadn't been damaged by this summer's flash flood. It had been the site of a much older disaster, one that happened 37 years ago. A flash flood in August 1987 had swept through the camping area during peak season, when all 24 sites were occupied. 17 people lost their lives, including 3 entire families who'd been camping together for their annual reunion. The current flood had simply repeated history, washing out the same geographic low point that had been rebuilt and reopened, despite the obvious danger. The insurance disputes, the delays in repairs, it was all happening again, following the same pattern that had played out decades earlier. That night, I returned to Section C with new understanding. I didn't bring a flashlight this time. Instead, I sat quietly in the darkness and listened to the voices of people who had loved this place enough to return, even after death had taken them away from it. The families were setting up camp again, just as they had every August for 37 years. Children who would never grow old played in the spaces between tent sites. Parents who had died protecting their families continued their eternal camping trip, unaware that the flood had ever ended. I heard my name called from Site C-15, a woman's voice asking if I could help with their campfire. For a moment, I considered walking down the dark path to offer assistance, to join the gathering that somehow existed in the spaces between reality and memory. But I knew that if I crossed that threshold, if I became part of their campground, I might never find my way back to the world where morning comes and campers pack up and drive home to their regular lives. Instead, I sat at the barrier and listened to the phantom families enjoy their endless camping trip, their voices carrying love and laughter through the darkness. They weren't harmful spirits or restless ghosts. They were simply people who had found paradise in the wilderness and refused to let death evict them from it. As dawn approached, the voices grew fainter, fading like mist before the sun. The smell of wood smoke dissipated, replaced by the clean scent of morning dew on pine needles. Section C returned to its daylight state, damaged, empty, officially closed. But I knew they'd be back tonight, and every night thereafter, setting up camp in the spaces where joy had once flourished. And I realized that my job wasn't just to manage the living campers in Sections A and B. I was also the caretaker of Section C's eternal residents. The phantom families who had made Whispering Pines their permanent home. They deserved the same protection and respect as any other campers, even if they no longer needed permits or paid fees. The insurance company could fight about repairs all they wanted. Some places are meant to remain exactly as they are, home to visitors who will never leave. Story 5. I've been supervising night logging operations for Cascade Timber for 11 years, and I know the rhythm of forest removal by heart. The growl of chainsaws, the crash of falling giants, the mechanical whine of skidders dragging logs to the landing. It's methodical work, turning living forest into board feet of lumber, according to carefully planned harvest schedules. But something is happening in Block 7 that challenges everything I understand about forestry, about time, about the very nature of growth and death in the wilderness. It started 3 weeks ago, on a Monday night shift. My crew had finished clearing a 2-acre section of old-growth Douglas fir, massive trees that had stood for over 2 centuries. By dawn, the area looked like every other fresh cut, a wasteland of stumps and slash, torn earth and scattered branches. The cleanup crew would come in Tuesday to haul away debris, and by week's end, the site would be ready for replanting young seedlings. But when I returned Tuesday night, the stumps were different. Not dramatically different, nothing that would be obvious to a casual observer. But I've been walking logging sites for over a decade, and I noticed details. The stumps seemed fresher. The cut surfaces, which should have started oxidizing and darkening after 24 hours of exposure, looked newly sawn. The sawdust around their bases appeared lighter, as if the cuts had happened moments before rather than a full day earlier. I attributed it to memory playing tricks. Night work can be disorienting, especially when you're managing multiple crews across thousands of acres of forest. The stumps were probably exactly as we'd left them, and my tired mind was manufacturing inconsistencies. Wednesday night brought stranger observations. The stumps in the cleared section definitely looked different, not just fresh, but somehow more robust. What should have been dead wood showed subtle signs of life, a faint sheen of moisture seeping from the cuts, tiny beads of sap that caught my flashlight beam like tears. I knelt beside one of the larger stumps, a Douglas fir that had been nearly 4 feet in diameter. The chainsaw cuts were clean and level, exactly as my crew had left them. But running my hand across the surface, I could feel something that shouldn't have been there. The slightest hint of warmth, as if the wood still held some trace of living circulation. Thursday, I brought a crew back to finish the cleanup in Block 7. We were loading the last of the slash when Martinez, one of my most experienced operators, called me over to look at something. "Jeff," he said, pointing at a stump near the edge of the clearing. "This don't look right." The stump he indicated was definitely wrong. Where Tuesday's cut should have left a flat surface about 3 feet high, this stump extended almost 4 feet from the ground. More disturbing, the top wasn't the clean, geometric plane left by a chainsaw, but a rough, organic surface that looked like it had been torn rather than cut. "You sure this is one of ours?" I asked, though I knew it had to be. We'd mapped every tree in the section before beginning the harvest. Martinez nodded, but I could see doubt in his eyes. Cut it myself Tuesday morning. Remember, because it was the biggest tree in this section. But look at it now. I measured the stump with my folding ruler. 4 feet, 2 inches. My harvest notes showed the original cut at exactly 3 feet. Either my measurements were wrong, or the stump had somehow grown 14 inches in 2 days. That night, I stayed late in Block 7, sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, watching the stumps in the pale moonlight. The rational part of my mind insisted that nothing unusual was happening, that stress and fatigue were making me see patterns where none existed. But another part of me a deeper instinct honed by years in the wilderness, whispered that I was witnessing something profound and impossible. Around 2 a.m., I heard the first sound, a soft creaking, like green wood bending in wind. But there was no wind, and there were no standing trees left in the clearing to make that sound. The creaking seemed to come from the stumps themselves, from the dead wood that should have been silent. I played my flashlight beam across the clearing, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw something that made my heart race. The stumps looked taller, not dramatically, just a few inches, but noticeably higher than they'd been at sunset. I stood up, moving closer to the nearest stump for a better look. As I approached, the creaking sound stopped, leaving only the normal night sounds of the forest. Wind in the remaining trees, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But the stump was definitely taller. I spent the rest of the night taking measurements, photographing stumps from multiple angles, documenting what I was seeing with the methodical precision of someone who knew no one would believe him. Every stump in the clearing showed signs of vertical growth, some just an inch or two, others nearly a foot. By dawn, I had documented growth rates that should have been impossible. Dead wood doesn't regenerate. Cut trees don't continue growing. Yet the evidence was there in my photographs, measurements, and detailed notes. Friday night, I brought a digital camera with timestamp capability and set up a time-lapse recording of the largest stump. If the growth was really happening, I'd have proof. If it was some kind of perceptual error on my part, the camera would show static images of unchanging stumps. The time-lapse ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., capturing one frame every 30 seconds. When I reviewed the footage later that morning, I saw 8 hours compressed into 2 minutes of video that challenged everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The stumps were growing. Not quickly, the change was barely perceptible in real time, but consistently. They extended upward at a rate of roughly 1 inch per hour. Dead wood somehow finding the energy and biological processes to continue vertical development. But that wasn't the most disturbing part of the footage. As the stumps grew taller, they also began to change shape. The flat, artificial surfaces left by chainsaws gradually gave way to more organic profiles. By dawn, several stumps had developed what looked almost like primitive bark formation around their edges. I watched the video a dozen times, looking for some rational explanation. Could some kind of fungal growth cause this appearance of regeneration? Was moisture absorption causing the wood to swell in ways that mimic natural growth? But no alternative explanation could account for the consistent, measured expansion I was documenting. By the second week of observations, the stumps in Block 7 had grown tall enough to cast shadows again. What had been a devastated clearing was beginning to look like a young forest of perfectly spaced, branchless trees. The growth rate had accelerated, as if whatever force was driving the regeneration was gaining strength or confidence. Wednesday of the second week brought the most significant development yet. I arrived at Block 7 to find that several stumps had developed what could only be described as new growth. Tiny green buds, no larger than pencil erasers, had appeared near the tops of the tallest specimens. They looked exactly like the spring buds of Douglas fir, complete with the characteristic needle clusters just beginning to emerge. I collected samples of the budding tissue and had them analyzed at the forestry lab. The results came back 3 days later with a notation I'd never seen before. Sample shows cellular activity consistent with active growth in healthy Pseudotsuga menziesi specimens. Recommend immediate follow-up study. The lab technician called me personally, something that had never happened in 11 years of routine sample submissions. Mr. Chen, I need to ask you about the collection circumstances for sample 7B, she said, her voice tight with confusion. The cellular activity we're seeing suggests this tissue was harvested from a living, actively growing tree. But according to your notes, this came from a stump that was cut 3 weeks ago. I explained what I'd been observing, knowing how insane it would sound. There was a long pause before she responded. That's not possible. Dead cambium doesn't regenerate cellular activity. What you're describing violates basic principles of plant biology. But the evidence was growing literally before my eyes. By the end of the second week, some stumps had reached 8 feet in height, with healthy green needles beginning to emerge from their newly formed branches. They cast real shadows now, filtered real sunlight, contributed to the forest canopy in ways that dead wood simply cannot. I stopped scheduling crews to work in Block 7. How could I explain to my supervisors that the trees we'd harvested were returning? That our careful logging operation was being undone by some force that refused to accept the finality of death. Instead, I began spending my off hours in the regenerating forest, documenting the impossible recovery with the dedication of someone who knew he was witnessing history. The stumps, I couldn't call them that anymore, had developed individual characteristics. Some grew straight and tall. Others showed the slight curves that come from reaching toward optimal sunlight. Their bark patterns were unique, their branching structures following the genetic templates of their original forms. It was as if the forest was rebuilding itself from memory, using the stumps as foundation points to recreate what had been destroyed. 3 weeks after the initial harvest, I made the most startling discovery yet. While measuring the height of the tallest regenerated tree, now nearly 12 feet tall, with a full crown of healthy needles, I noticed something carved into its bark about 6 feet from the ground. Initials: JM, CSR 1987, surrounded by a heart, exactly the kind of romantic carving young couples leave on memorable trees during camping trips. But we had cut down the tree that bore that carving 3 weeks ago. I had personally supervised its removal, watched it fall, seen it sectioned and loaded onto logging trucks. Yet here were the same initials in the same style, at exactly the same height on the regenerated trunk. The tree wasn't just regrowing, it was remembering. I spent the night researching the initials, checking old campground registrations and local records. JM and SR turned out to be James Morrison and Susan Rodriguez, who had gotten married in 1988 after a camping proposal beneath what local guides called the cathedral tree, a massive Douglas fir that had stood in this exact location for over 3 centuries. James and Susan had returned every year for their anniversary, camping beneath their tree, watching it grow from 200 feet to nearly 250 feet over the course of their 5-year marriage. They'd brought their children here, taught them to identify plants and animals, to respect the wilderness that had brought their parents together. The tree we'd cut down had been their tree. And somehow, it was returning to fulfill promises made in carved bark, to continue its role as guardian of human love stories and family traditions. By the fourth week, Block 7 looked like a young forest again. The regenerated trees had reached heights of 15 to 20 feet, with healthy crowns and strong root systems that I could see beginning to interweave beneath the forest floor. Birds had returned to nest in the branches. Squirrels chattered from crown to crown. The ecosystem was rebuilding itself around these impossible trees. I knew I couldn't keep this secret much longer. The company's aerial surveys would eventually notice that Block 7, which should have been an empty clear-cut, was showing forest cover again. Questions would be asked. Investigations would follow. But as I sat beneath the regenerated cathedral tree on a Thursday night, watching James and Susan's carved initials catch the moonlight, I realized that some discoveries are too profound for corporate forestry reports. The forest had taught me something about resilience, about the difference between harvesting wood and destroying ecosystems. Every tree we cut carried within it not just board feet of lumber, but decades or centuries of relationships with soil, with wildlife, with human visitors who had found meaning in its presence. When we removed trees, we weren't just taking wood. We were severing connections that the forest considered too important to abandon. Friday night, I submitted my final supervisor's report for Block 7 Day. Harvest complete. Site ready for natural regeneration study. Recommend long-term monitoring to document recovery patterns. It was the truth, just not the complete truth. The monitoring would reveal that nature has resources we don't yet understand, methods of restoration that exist beyond our current scientific models. The Block 7 would become a case study in forest resilience, though the researchers would never quite figure out how the recovery happened so quickly. I transferred to day shift the following week, telling my supervisor that night work was becoming too difficult. But the real reason was simpler. I needed to sleep at night, to dream of ordinary forests where cut trees stay cut and growth follows predictable timelines. Some secrets are too big to carry alone, too strange to share, too beautiful to destroy with skepticism. Block 7 continues to grow, continues to remember, continues to prove that the relationship between humans and forests is more complex than any logging manual could ever describe. And every year on their anniversary, I imagine James and Susan returning to find their cathedral tree waiting for them, taller than before, carrying their carved promise into whatever future the forest chooses to create. Story 6. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was a GPS malfunction. After 15 years of tracking wildlife migrations, you learn to expect technical glitches. Satellites drift, receivers fail, and sometimes the data just doesn't make sense. But this particular anomaly kept me awake at night, staring at my computer screen until my eyes burned. Subject 47 Alpha. A wolf, at least. That's what we tagged it as 3 months ago, when we first detected its signal in the northern wilderness. The collar's specifications were standard. Solar-powered, designed to last 5 years, transmitting location data every 6 hours. Nothing unusual about the setup. Nothing unusual about the wolf, from what little we glimpsed during the initial tagging operation. But the data it was sending back, that was different. I'm sitting in my cabin now, listening to the wind scrape against the windows like fingernails on glass. The screen glows in front of me, displaying coordinates that shouldn't exist. According to our GPS tracking system, Subject 47, Alpha has remained in the exact same location for the past 97 days. Not approximately the same area, the exact same coordinates down to the decimal point. 37.2847 WZN 109.389.2 I've checked and rechecked the equipment. I've run diagnostics on the satellite connection. I've even driven out to the location twice, finding nothing but empty forest and the faint scent of pine needles warming in the afternoon sun. No wolf, no den, no signs of any animal having been there recently. But the signal persists. The strange part isn't just the stationary readings. It's what I discovered when I started digging through our historical archives. The same coordinates appear in our database from tracking operations conducted in 1987, 1962, and 1941. Different research teams, different equipment, different tagged subjects, all showing the exact same location. All wolves, all named Subject 47 Alpha. My fingers hover over the keyboard as I scroll through decades of field reports. The language is formal, scientific, but I can sense the confusion bleeding through the clinical prose. Dr. Margaret Chen, 1987. Anomalous readings persist despite equipment replacement. Dr. Harold Morrison, 1962. Subject exhibits unprecedented territorial consistency. Elizabeth Walsh, 1941. Further investigation recommended regarding locational fixation. The reports grow stranger the further back I read. References to temporal displacement and chronological inconsistencies appear in documents that are supposed to be about simple wildlife tracking. There are photographs, too, grainy black and white images from the 1940s showing the same forest clearing I visited last week. The trees look identical. Not similar, identical. Same broken branch, same fallen log, same pattern of light filtering through the canopy, as if time stopped there. I close the laptop and walk to the window. The forest stretches endlessly in all directions, green that seems to pulse in the moonlight. Somewhere out there at coordinates 37.2847 N 109.389 GW, a signal continues to transmit. Every 6 hours, like clockwork, like a heartbeat, the wind shifts, carrying with it a sound I've never heard before in all my years of wilderness work. It's low, almost subsonic, vibrating through the ground and up through the cabin's wooden foundation. A howl, perhaps. But wolves don't howl like this. This sound seems to come from everywhere at once, wrapping around me like cold water. I return to the computer, pulling up the real time-tracking display. The familiar red dot pulses at those impossible coordinates. As I watch, the timestamp updates 23:34:7:32. The next transmission isn't due for another 4 hours, but I find myself unable to look away from the screen. There's something hypnotic about watching that single point of light in the digital darkness. It never moves, never wavers. Just sits there like a beacon, transmitting its location to anyone willing to listen. But what if it's not transmitting where it is? What if it's transmitting where it's always been? The howling stops suddenly, leaving behind a silence so complete it makes my ears ring. I check my watch, 23:48. 1 minute since the last GPS update. But as I look at the screen, I notice something that makes my breath catch in my throat. The timestamp is wrong. According to the tracking system, the last update was received at 20:34:7:32 on September 15th, 1987. I refresh the page, thinking it's a display error. but the date remains. I check my computer's clock. It shows the current date and time. But the GPS data is coming from 1987. The same minute, the same second, but 38 years in the past. My hands shake as I open the communication logs. The data stream from Subject 47. Alpha shows constant transmission, but now I can see what I missed before. The timestamps don't follow linear time. They jump backward and forward seemingly at random: 1962, 2003, 1941, 2019, 1987. All the same coordinates, all the same subject, all the same moment, experienced again and again across decades. I stand up too quickly, knocking over my coffee mug. The liquid spreads across my desk, seeping into papers and pooling around the keyboard. But I barely notice. Something is happening outside. The forest is changing. Through the window, I can see lights moving between the trees. Not flashlights or campfires. These lights are wrong somehow. They pulse with the same rhythm as the GPS signal, casting everything in shades of green and gold that don't exist in nature. The trees seem to bend toward these lights, their branches reaching like desperate fingers. The computer chimes behind me. New data incoming. I turn back to the screen, coffee still dripping from the desk onto my boots. The coordinates remain the same, but now there's additional information. Speed 0.0 Direction, NTA, altitude variable, variable altitude. For a wolf that hasn't moved in 97 days. I grab my coat and flashlight. I have to see this for myself. The GPS unit in my truck has the coordinates programmed. I can drive there in 40 minutes if I take the old logging road. As I head for the door, the computer chimes again and again and again. Data flooding in now, timestamps cascading across the screen like digital rain. 1941, 1962, 1987, 2003, 2019, and dates I don't recognize. Future dates. Years that haven't happened yet, but all showing the same location. The truck starts on the third try, engine coughing in the cold night air. I navigate by memory and GPS, following dirt roads that grow narrower with each mile. The headlights carve a tunnel through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and undergrowth. No signs of wildlife. No sounds except the truck's engine and the crunch of gravel under tires. 30 minutes into the drive, I notice my GPS is malfunctioning. The screen shows my location, but it also shows Subject 47, Alpha's position getting closer. Not because I'm approaching it, because it's approaching me. The red dot moves across the digital map, following my exact route, but in reverse. As if it started from where I'm going and is traveling back to where I've been. I stop the truck. The silence that follows is absolute. Even the engine seems muted, as if the sound is being absorbed by something unseen. I check the GPS again. According to the display, Subject 47, Alpha is now 50 feet directly ahead of me. I aim my flashlight through the windshield, sweeping the beam across the road. Nothing. Just empty asphalt and the wall of trees on either side. But the GPS insists something is there. I step out of the truck, leaving the engine running and the headlights on. The night air is cold against my face, carrying scents I can't identify. Not pine or earth or the usual forest smells. Something else. Something older. 50 feet ahead, the road disappears into a curve. I walk toward it slowly, flashlight beam dancing ahead of my footsteps. My breathing sounds unnaturally loud in the stillness. Each exhale forms a small cloud that hangs in the air longer than it should. 20 feet from the curve, I stop. The GPS in my pocket is beeping rapidly now, indicating I'm very close to the target. But there's still nothing visible, just road and trees and the weight of unseen presence. I take another step forward. The world shifts. Not dramatically, just a subtle change in the quality of light and shadow. The trees look different, though I can't say exactly how. The road beneath my feet feels different too, as if it's made of something other than asphalt. When I look back toward my truck, the headlights seem farther away than they should be. The GPS in my pocket has gone silent. I pull it out, hands shaking slightly. The screen shows my location as 37.2847 degrees N, 109.389 W. The exact coordinates where Subject 47, Alpha, has been transmitting from. But that's impossible. I'm still on the road, at least a mile from the actual location. Unless the actual location isn't a place at all. The forest around me begins to change. Trees shift position when I'm not looking directly at them. The road behind me grows longer, stretching back into darkness that swallows my truck's headlights. Ahead, the curve straightens into a path that leads deeper into woods I don't recognize. I try to turn around, to go back to my truck and drive home and forget about Subject 47, Alpha and its impossible data. But when I turn, the road behind me is gone. There's only forest now, trees growing so close together that no vehicle could pass between them. The GPS beeps once, sharply. I look at the display. A new message appears. Tracking initiated. Subject 47 Alpha. Duration indefinite. But I'm not wearing a tracking collar. Am I? I reach up to touch my neck, feeling for the familiar weight of a radio transmitter. My fingers find something there, smooth metal and plastic, warm against my skin. When did that happen? How long have I been wearing it? The forest grows brighter around me, though there's no visible source of light. Everything takes on that same green, gold glow I saw from my cabin window. The trees pulse gently, in rhythm with something I can feel in my chest. A heartbeat that isn't mine. Or maybe it is mine. Maybe it's always been mine. I walk deeper into the woods, following a path that appears beneath my feet with each step. Behind me, I can hear the distant sound of a truck engine starting up, driving away into the night. Someone else investigating GPS anomalies, following coordinates that lead to places that don't exist on any map. The tracking collar around my neck grows warmer. It's signal broadcasting my location to researchers I'll never meet. 372847 on 109.3892 WW, same as always. Same as it's always been. I've been here before, I realize. Many times. Different years, different decades, but always the same moment. Always the same forest. Always the same coordinates. Always Subject 47 Alpha. The path ahead divides into multiple routes, each leading to the same destination. I can see them all simultaneously, past and future journeys overlapping like transparent photographs. In 1941, I follow the eastern branch. In 1962, the western one. In 1987, I walk straight ahead. In 2019, I haven't decided yet, but it doesn't matter which path I choose. They all lead to the same place, the same moment, the same endless transmission of my location to whoever might be listening. I close my eyes and let my feet carry me forward. The GPS in my pocket beeps softly, steadily marking time that has no meaning. Somewhere, in a cabin I remember dimly, a researcher stares at a computer screen, trying to understand why Subject 47, Alpha, never moves. The answer is simple. I'm not moving, because I'm already everywhere I need to be. every moment I've ever existed, every location I've ever occupied, all compressed into these coordinates. Time folds in on itself here, creating a single point that contains all points. The tracking collar's signal grows stronger. And somewhere in the forest, another truck engine starts up, carrying another researcher toward the same impossible destination. The cycle continues. 30 Sempan 2847 Driven under 10953892W always. Story 7. The ground-penetrating radar picks up the first knock at 11:47 p.m. I'm 3 hours into my shift, sitting in the climate-controlled trailer that serves as our mobile command center for the geological survey. The forest outside is completely dark, except for our floodlights, which create harsh white circles in the endless black of the Oregon wilderness. Inside, banks of monitors display subsurface data in real time, painting pictures of what lies beneath our feet in shades of blue and green. The knock comes from 60 feet underground. Theta single, sharp percussion that registers on the seismic sensors as a brief spike in the data stream. I pause my coffee cup halfway to my lips, watching the waveform scroll across the screen. Could be anything: settling rock, groundwater movement, maybe equipment interference. After 6 months of night shifts mapping the geological structure beneath this forest, I've learned that the earth is rarely silent. But this sound is different for tap. Tap, 2 knocks now, spaced exactly 3 seconds apart. The seismic pattern is too regular, too precise to be natural. I adjust the sensitivity on the deep field sensors, trying to isolate the source. The equipment shows the sound originating from a specific depth and location 61.3 feet down, approximately 50 meters northwest of my trailer. I make a note in the logbook: 11:47 p.m. Anomalous percussion detected, depth 61.3 feet. Investigating. Evas tap, tap. Tap of 3 knocks. Same rhythm, same intensity, same location. My skin prickles despite the trailer's warmth. I've worked enough night shifts to know that isolation can play tricks on your mind. But the equipment doesn't lie. Something down there is making deliberate, rhythmic sounds. I pull up the geological survey data for that area. According to our mapping, it's solid bedrock, ancient granite formations that have been stable for millions of years. No caves, no voids, no spaces where anything could move around. Just solid stone. Yet the knocking continues. A tap, tap, tap. Top 4 now. The pattern is growing, adding 1 knock each cycle. I grab my headphones and plug them into the audio feed from the seismic array. Through the electronic translation of ground vibrations, the knocks become clearer, more defined. They sound almost hollow, like someone tapping on wood rather than stone. My hands shake slightly as I adjust the frequency filters. The knocking has a quality to it that reminds me of something, though I can't place what. It's familiar in a way that makes my stomach twist. Tap, 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 top 5 knocks. The progression continues. I check the other monitoring stations scattered throughout the forest. Each one consists of sensitive seismic equipment designed to map underground structures for potential mining operations. The data streams from all 12 stations appear normal, except for Station 7, which is positioned directly above the source of the knocking. Station 7's readings are impossible. According to its instruments, there's a void space 60 feet underground. Not a small cavity, a significant hollow area, roughly the size of a room. But our initial geological surveys showed solid rock at that depth. I've personally reviewed the core samples taken from that exact location just 2 months ago. Solid granite. No voids. No spaces where anything could exist. Tap, 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 tap. The 6 knocks now. The sound is getting louder, more insistent. I can hear it through the trailer walls even without the headphones. A distant but persistent percussion that seems to come from everywhere at once. I step outside into the cold night air, needing to confirm what I'm hearing. The forest is utterly silent except for the hum of generators powering our equipment. No wind, no animal sounds. Just the steady electrical buzz of lights and machinery. And then, from beneath my feet, the knocking. Tap, 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 tap. Tap 7 times. I can feel it now, as well as hear its subtle vibrations traveling up through the soles of my boots. The frozen ground transmits the sound perfectly, turning the entire forest floor into a massive speaker cone. I walk toward Station 7, following the network of cables that connect the monitoring equipment. My flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, illuminating trees and underbrush, but revealing nothing unusual about the ground itself. A just normal forest floor covered with fallen leaves and the occasional patch of snow. But underneath, something continues its rhythmic communication. Tap, 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 tap. Ta 8 knocks. The pattern holds, each cycle adds one more tap. I'm standing directly over Station 7 now, on ground that should be solid stone 60 feet down. The vibrations travel up through my legs, into my chest, making my ribs resonate like a tuning fork. I kneel down and place my bare hand on the earth. The knocking is more distinct now, each tap separated by exactly 3 seconds. Through the palm of my hand, I can feel the ground responding, transmitting each percussion with mechanical precision. But there's something else. Between the knocks, in the 3-second gaps, I can sense movement. Not dramatic motion, just subtle shifts in the subsurface pressure, as if something large is repositioning itself in preparation for the next tap. Something large enough to displace solid rock. Tap, 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 tap. Now 9 knocks. I stand up quickly, suddenly aware of how exposed I am out here in the darkness. The rational part of my mind insists there must be an explanation: underground water flow, settling foundations, equipment malfunction. But my instincts are screaming that something is very wrong. I return to the trailer and check the historical data logs. Our seismic monitoring has been running continuously for 6 months, recording every vibration and ground movement in this area. If the knocking has been happening before tonight, there should be evidence in the archives. I scroll back through weeks of data, looking for similar patterns. The readings are normal until 3 weeks ago, when the first anomalous percussion appears in the records. A single tap at 11:47 p.m., same depth, same location. The next night, 2 taps. The night after that, 3. Every night for the past 3 weeks. The pattern has been building. 1 additional knock per cycle, always starting at 11:47 p.m., always from the same impossible location, 60 feet underground. Tonight marks the 21st night. 21 knocks. Tap, 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 tap. I count along with the percussion, my lips moving silently. 10, 11, 12. The knocking continues. Each tap perfectly spaced, perfectly consistent. 15, 16, 17. My heart rate increases as the count approaches 21, 18, 19, 20, The forest goes silent. I wait, counting seconds. 1 Mississippi, Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The 21st knock should come now, completing the pattern. It doesn't. The silence stretches on, broken only by the hum of equipment and the distant sound of wind through the trees. I stare at the seismic monitors, watching for any sign of subsurface activity. The readings show normal background levels, no unusual vibrations, no structural movements. As if the knocking never happened. I check the audio recordings, pulling up the files from the past hour. They're all there, the complete progression from 1 tap to 20, each cycle clearly documented. But now, in real time, there's nothing. The silence feels heavier than the knocking did. I make coffee and try to focus on routine tasks, updating survey logs and reviewing tomorrow's drilling schedule. But every few minutes I find myself glancing at the clock. 12:23 a.m., 12:31 a.m., 12:45 a.m. At 12:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour after the knocking started, the seismic sensors spike. A single knock from 60 feet underground. The pattern is beginning again. A tap, tap, 2 knocks. 3 seconds apart. Same depth. Same location. Same impossible precision. I grab my jacket and head back outside, drawn by a compulsion I can't explain. The night air is colder now, cutting through my clothes with knife-edge sharpness. My breath forms clouds that dissipate quickly in the still air. Standing over Station 7, I can feel the vibrations traveling up from below. But there's something different this time. The knocks seem closer, as if the source has moved upward through the solid stone. Not by much, maybe 5 or 10 feet, but definitively closer to the surface. A tap, tap. 3 knocks now. I close my eyes and focus on the sensation traveling through my feet. Each percussion sends waves through the ground, creating interference patterns that I can feel as much as hear. But between the waves, in the moments of stillness, there's something else. Breathing. Not human breathing, something slower, deeper, more methodical. The 3-second gaps between knocks align perfectly with inhalation and exhalation cycles, as if whatever is making the sounds is using the rhythm of its own respiration to time the percussion. Tap, tap. For 4 knocks. The breathing continues, synchronized with the pattern. I kneel down again, pressing my ear to the ground. Through the frozen earth, I can hear it more clearly now, a sound like wind through a large cavern, but with the organic quality of living respiration. Something is breathing 60 feet underground, in solid stone hap. Tap, 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 5 knocks. I stand up and back away from the monitoring station, suddenly understanding what I'm experiencing. The progression isn't random, it's communication. Each night, the pattern builds, adding complexity and duration. Like a signal growing stronger, or a message being transmitted in incremental pieces. But what happens when the message is complete? I return to the trailer and pull up the mathematical projections. If the pattern continues adding 1 knock per night, and if it started 3 weeks ago with a single tap, then the progression will reach its natural conclusion in exactly 1 week. 28 knocks on the final night. 28. 4 weeks. A lunar cycle. I check the astronomical calendar. The pattern began on the new moon. In 1 week, when it reaches 28 knocks, there will be a full moon directly overhead. Tap, 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 tap. A 6 knocks echo through the ground beneath me. Whatever is down there knows I'm listening. The vibrations seem more purposeful now, more directed, like fingers tapping impatiently on a table, waiting for a response. I make a decision that I know is either brilliant or insane. I grab a hammer from the equipment kit and go back outside. Standing over Station 7, I raise the hammer and bring it down sharply against the frozen ground. The impact sends a clear percussion through the earth, recorded by our sensors as a brief seismic spike. The knocking stops. For 30 seconds, there's complete silence. Then, from 60 feet below, a response. A tap, a single knock, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. An acknowledgement. My hands shake as I raise the hammer again. I strike the ground twice in rapid succession. A tap, tap, from below a tap, tap. The echo comes back exactly, same rhythm, same intensity. Whatever is down there is listening to me, just as intently as I've been listening to it. I try a more complex pattern, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more, tap, 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 tap. The response mirrors my pattern perfectly. A tap, tap, a tap, tap. But then it continues, adding its own variation. Tap, 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 tap. The extra tap hangs in the silence like a question, like an invitation to expand the conversation. I spend the next hour developing a rhythm with whatever is 60 feet below me. It learns quickly, mimicking every pattern I create and then adding its own embellishments. The exchange becomes almost musical, a percussion duet performed through layers of stone and earth. But as the conversation continues, I notice the responses are getting louder, stronger. The seismic readings show increasing intensity with each exchange, as if the source is moving closer to the surface, or as if it's getting stronger. By 2 a.m., the knocking from below has become powerful enough to rattle the equipment in my trailer. Coffee mugs slide across tables with each percussion. The monitors flicker in rhythm with the underground beats. And then, as suddenly as it began, the communication stops. I wait outside in the cold, hammer in hand, but there are no more responses to my attempts at contact. The seismic readings return to normal levels. The forest settles back into its natural silence. But I know it's still there. The 60 feet down in solid stone that shouldn't contain anything. Listening. Waiting. Preparing for tomorrow night's continuation of the pattern. 21 knocks tonight. 22 tomorrow. 28 on the night of the full moon. I walk back to the trailer, leaving the hammer outside by Station 7. Whatever is down there might want to continue the conversation tomorrow night. I want to be ready. As I fill out the night's log entries, I realize I haven't been thinking about the knocking as an anomaly anymore. It's become a dialogue, a relationship, something I look forward to despite the fear it generates, or maybe because of it. The clock shows 3:17 a.m. In 20 hours and 30 minutes, the knocking will begin again. 2 taps from something that exists in spaces where existence should be impossible. I pour another cup of coffee and settle in to wait. Outside, the forest is quiet, but underneath, I can sense the patient presence of something vast and patient, counting down the hours until tomorrow night's performance. Tomorrow, I'll bring a bigger hammer, and maybe, if I listen carefully enough, I'll finally understand what it's trying to tell me. The ground beneath my feet holds its secrets close, but not forever. In 7 days, under the full moon, the message will be complete. And then, perhaps, I'll learn what has been knocking so persistently at the boundary between stone and void. between silence and sound, or between the world above and whatever waits below. Story 8. I've been the night manager of Thornfield Botanical Conservatory for 3 years, but I only discovered the luminescence last month. It was pure chance, really. A power outage during the Okber full moon left me stumbling through the ancient grove section with nothing but a dying flashlight and muscle memory to guide me. The conservatory's emergency lighting had failed, leaving 500 acres of carefully maintained gardens in complete darkness. That's when I saw the trees glowing. Not all of them, just the oldest specimens in our collection. The 1,000-year-old coast redwood near the main path. The ancient oak that predates the conservatory by 4 centuries. The massive pine that our founder rescued from a logging operation in 1897. Their bark seemed to pulse with a soft, ethereal light that had nothing to do with bioluminescence or reflected moonbeams. The light was coming from inside the wood itself, following the pattern of growth rings like veins of liquid starlight. I should have reported it immediately. Should have called Dr. Martinez, the head botanist, or contacted the university research team that studies our rare specimens. Instead, I stood there in the darkness, watching centuries of tree growth illuminate themselves in ways that botany textbooks insist are impossible. The luminescence lasted exactly as long as the power outage, 47 minutes. When the emergency generators kicked in and the security lights flooded the conservatory with harsh white illumination, the organic glow faded until it was indistinguishable from ordinary bark. But I knew what I had seen. Over the following weeks, I began timing my rounds to coincide with the moon's phases. The luminescence only occurs during the full moon, and only when artificial lighting is minimal. It took me several attempts to recreate the conditions of that first accidental discovery. Tonight is the November full moon, and I'm prepared. I've disabled the security lights in the ancient grove section, creating a pocket of natural darkness within the otherwise illuminated conservatory. My excuse, if anyone asks, is routine maintenance on the electrical systems. But really, I just need to see the trees breathe light again. I'm walking the familiar paths now, guided by moonbeams filtering through the canopy above. The conservatory at night is a different place entirely. Sounds carry further. Shadows take on substance, and the boundaries between cultivation and wildness become blurred. After 3 years of night shifts, I've learned to navigate by the rustle of specific leaves and the particular way moonlight reflects off the memorial plaques near each specimen. The ancient grove occupies the heart of the conservatory, a carefully planned arrangement of trees that represents centuries of botanical collection and conservation. Each tree has a story rescued from development, propagated from extinct populations, or collected from remote locations by generations of botanists. They're living libraries, containing information about climates and ecosystems that no longer exist. But tonight, there's something more. As I approach the 1,000-year-old redwood, I can already see the faint traces of luminescence beginning to emerge from its deeply furrowed bark. The light starts as barely visible threads, following the spiral pattern of the tree's growth rings. Slowly, like water soaking into fabric, the glow spreads and intensifies until entire sections of the trunk pulse with soft, golden radiance. I place my hand against the bark, feeling the rough texture of ancient wood beneath my palm. The tree is warm, not the simple warmth of sunlight absorbed during the day, but something deeper and more complex. A living warmth that seems to flow through the wood like blood through veins. The luminescence responds to my touch, brightening around my fingers as if the tree recognizes my presence. I can feel something moving beneath the bark, not sap or moisture, but something that resonates with the rhythm of my own pulse. Moving to the ancient oak, I find the same phenomenon occurring. But this tree's light is different, cooler, more silver than gold, and pulsing in a slower, more deliberate rhythm. The growth rings are clearly visible through the luminescence, creating concentric circles of light that expand outward from the center of the trunk, like ripples on water. Each ring represents a year of the tree's life, and as I watch, I begin to understand that the pattern of luminescence isn't random. Years with abundant rainfall glow brighter than drought years. Periods of rapid growth pulse faster than times of stress or dormancy. The tree is displaying its history in light, translating the chemical memory stored in its wood into something visible and beautiful. I pull out my notebook and begin documenting what I observe, though I know my words are inadequate to capture the experience. The luminescence creates its own vocabulary, expressing concepts that don't exist in ordinary language. How do you describe the light of a tree, remembering rainfall from 200 years ago? How do you quantify the visual representation of seasonal cycles stretching back before written history? The massive pine draws my attention next. This specimen has a more complex story than the others. It was nearly destroyed by fire in 1923, survived a lightning strike in 1967, and shows evidence of insect damage from the 1980s. As its bark begins to glow, I can see all of these events recorded in the patterns of light. The fire damage appears as areas where the luminescence is dimmed, but not extinguished, like scars that still retain memory. The lightning strike shows as a brilliant vertical line of white, gold light running down one side of the trunk, not destruction, but transformation captured in living wood. The insect damage creates intricate lacework patterns in the glow, beautiful rather than destructive. I'm beginning to realize that what I'm witnessing isn't just luminescence, it's communication. These trees are sharing their stories, displaying their experiences in a language of light that only becomes visible under specific conditions. The full moon provides the trigger, but the darkness is equally necessary. Too much artificial light overwhelms the delicate luminescence, drowning it out like city lights obscure the stars. As I move deeper into the ancient grove, I discover that not all old trees participate in this phenomenon. The luminescence seems to require more than just age. There's a quality of accumulated experience, of surviving significant events, that triggers the light. Trees that have lived sheltered, protected lives remain dark. Only those that have endured challenges and changes display this nighttime radiance. The patterns are growing more complex as the moon reaches its zenith. What started as simple rings of light have evolved into intricate networks of luminescence, connecting different areas of each tree in ways that seem to follow the flow of nutrients and information through the wood. I can see the paths that water takes from roots to leaves, the channels that carry chemical signals in response to seasonal changes. the networks that allow the tree to communicate with fungal partners in the soil. But there's something else happening now, something that makes me question whether these displays are purely individual expressions. The trees are synchronizing. The pulsing patterns of luminescence are aligning, creating waves of light that flow from tree to tree across the grove. It's subtle at first, just a slight coordination in timing that might be coincidental. But as I watch, the synchronization becomes unmistakable. The redwood's golden glow peaks just as the oak's silver radiance reaches its maximum intensity. The pine's complex lacework flickers in perfect harmony with the others. They're communicating with each other. I move to the center of the grove, positioning myself where I can observe all the luminescent trees simultaneously. The coordination becomes even more apparent from this vantage point. Waves of light pulse outward from the oldest specimens toward the younger trees at the grove's periphery. The pattern reminds me of neurons firing in a brain, or the way mycelial networks share information through forest soils. But these trees aren't connected by visible roots or fungal threads. They're separated by carefully maintained pathways and landscaping that would have severed any underground connections decades ago. Yet somehow, they're still linked. The luminescence intensifies as the full moon reaches its peak directly overhead. Now I can see threads of light extending beyond the bark, reaching outward like phosphorescent tentacles. The threads are barely visible. Gossamer, thin streams of radiance that connect tree to tree in an intricate web of communication. I step closer to examine one of these connecting threads, but as my body interrupts its path, the light dims and shifts, rotating around me like water flowing around a stone. The trees are aware of my presence, adjusting their communication network to accommodate the disruption I represent. Standing in the middle of this luminous web, I feel like an intruder in an ancient conversation. These trees have stories spanning centuries, experiences that dwarf my brief human existence. What right do I have to witness their secret communications? What responsibility comes with this knowledge? My notebook feels inadequate now. How can I document something that exists beyond the boundaries of accepted science? Who would believe that trees communicate through patterns of light visible only during the full moon? Even I struggle to accept what I'm seeing, despite the evidence glowing all around me. A sound draws my attention, not quite a whisper, not quite the rustling of leaves. It's coming from the luminescent trees themselves, a barely audible susurration that seems to carry meaning despite being unlike any language I've ever heard. The sound coincides with fluctuations in the light patterns, as if the trees are speaking in harmonized illumination and acoustics. I close my eyes and listen more carefully. The sound isn't random. There are rhythms and repetitions that suggest structure, meaning, perhaps even syntax. It's a language of time measured in seasons and years rather than seconds and minutes, and expressing concepts that only become relevant when viewed across decades or centuries. When I open my eyes, the luminescence has changed again. The light patterns now include symbols, geometric shapes, formed by the intersection of growth rings and the flow of luminous threads. Triangles, or spirals, complex mandalas that appear and dissolve like frost on glass. The shapes seem familiar, though I can't place where I might have seen them before. I walk to the memorial plaque, at the base of the ancient oak, reading the familiar text by the light emanating from the tree itself. Quercus alba, approximately 400 years old, donated to the conservatory in 1923 by the Thornfield estate. But tonight, in the glow of the tree's own radiance, additional text becomes visible on the bronze plaque words, etched so lightly they're only readable when illuminated from within. The trees remember what we choose to forget. I check the other plaques, finding similar hidden messages on each one. Messages that weren't there during my daylight inspections, visible only in the luminescence of the full moon. The redwood's plaque reads, "Time moves differently for those who count seasons instead of heartbeats." The pine's inscription adds, "Every ring tells a story." But only some stories choose to glow. These additions aren't part of the original plaques. They're appearing and disappearing with the luminescence itself, as if the trees are rewriting their own historical records in real time. The implications make my hands shake as I continue taking notes. If the trees can somehow influence the physical world beyond their wooden boundaries, if they can make text appear on metal plaques, then what else might they be capable of? What other aspects of the conservatory might be under their subtle influence? I think about the 3 years I've worked here, the sense of peace and rightness I've always felt during my night rounds. Was that my own emotional response to the beauty of the gardens, or was it something more? Have the trees been influencing my mental state, drawing me into their sphere of influence through methods I couldn't perceive? The luminescence pulses brighter, as if responding to my thoughts. The connecting threads of light grow more substantial, creating a network of radiance that encompasses the entire grove. I'm standing in the center of this web, bathed in light that carries the accumulated memory of centuries. Suddenly, I understand why I was drawn to work here, why I chose night shifts despite the isolation, why I've never felt the need to seek other employment despite better opportunities elsewhere. The trees have been calling to me, selecting me as their witness, their guardian, their translator. But translator of what? What message are they trying to convey through this monthly display of luminescence? As if in response to my question, the light patterns shift into new configurations. The symbols become more complex, more clearly defined. I see representations of weather patterns, climate cycles, the advance and retreat of seasons across multiple decades. I see the encroachment of urbanization represented as angular, harsh lines cutting through organic curves. I see the gradual warming of average temperatures displayed as a slow shift from blue, white light toward gold and red. The trees are showing me their perspective on environmental change, not the simplified versions found in scientific reports, but the lived experience of organisms that have witnessed these changes directly across centuries of growth. They're displaying evidence that exists nowhere else, recorded in the cellular memory of their wood. The pine tree's display suddenly dominates my attention. Its luminescence has intensified to show a detailed chronology of atmospheric changes, subtle shifts in oxygen levels, carbon dioxide concentrations, the gradual accumulation of industrial pollutants in rainfall. The tree has been breathing these changes for over a century, recording them in growth ring chemistry that now translates into visible light. But the message isn't just historical, it's predictive. The patterns of luminescence extend beyond the visible rings, projecting future scenarios based on current trends. I see the tree's prediction of its own death, displayed as a gradual dimming of light that corresponds to projected climate conditions 30 years from now. All the luminescent trees are showing similar projections. Their combined display creates a comprehensive forecast of environmental change that's more detailed and more terrifying than any computer model. They're showing me their own extinction, and by extension, the end of the living world as we know it. The weight of this knowledge settles on me like a physical presence. These ancient trees, survivors of centuries of change, are unanimously predicting their own demise within decades. And they've chosen me to witness this prophecy, recorded in the only language they have, the language of light and time and cellular memory. The luminescence begins to fade as clouds drift across the moon's face. The connecting threads dissolve first, leaving each tree glowing in isolation before their individual radiance also dims. Within minutes, the ancient grove returns to its ordinary appearance. Trees that might be beautiful and ancient, but are no longer miraculous. I stand in the returning darkness, my notebook filled with inadequate words, and my mind reeling with implications I'm not equipped to process. Tomorrow, in daylight, I could convince myself this was all an elaborate hallucination brought on by too many solitary night shifts. The hidden text on the memorial plaques will be gone, leaving no evidence of what I've witnessed. But I know I'll be back next month, during the December full moon, and the month after that. The trees have chosen me as their witness, their confidant, their last hope of sharing their accumulated wisdom with a species that has forgotten how to listen to voices, that speak in seasons rather than words. I walk slowly back toward the conservatory's main building, following paths that seem different now that I understand the true nature of what grows here. These aren't just botanical specimens. They're libraries of environmental memory, archives of atmospheric history, prophets of ecological change. And once a month, under the full moon, they glow with the accumulated light of everything they've learned. As I reach the building, I turn back for one last look at the ancient grove. In the distance, I can see a faint residual luminescence still flickering among the trees, not the dramatic display of earlier, but a subtle reminder that the light is always there, just waiting for the right conditions to become visible. I unlock the building and step inside, already counting the days until the next full moon. 28 days until I can witness the trees' luminous memories again. 28 days to figure out what to do with the knowledge they've shared. 28 days to decide whether humanity deserves to hear the prophecies written in rings of light. Story 9. The camera feed shows me sleeping in my own bed. I'm watching this on my laptop at 2:47 a.m., sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that's gone cold hours ago. On the screen, I can see myself lying motionless under white sheets, face peaceful in the infrared glow of the night vision camera. The timestamp in the corner reads 2:04:17:12 a.m., the exact current moment. But I'm not in bed. I'm sitting here, fully awake, staring at footage of myself sleeping. The camera system was installed 3 weeks ago, after a series of break-ins in my neighborhood. Nothing elaborate, just a basic security setup with 4 cameras covering the perimeter of my house, and one interior camera in the bedroom for comprehensive coverage. The kind of system that records everything and uploads it to cloud storage, giving me the peace of mind that comes with knowing every angle is monitored. I never expected to become my own surveillance target. It started with small discrepancies. I'd review the overnight footage each morning and notice that I appeared to be sleeping in positions I didn't remember. Not dramatically different, just subtle shifts in posture that didn't align with how I recalled waking up. Since sleep is largely unconscious anyway, I dismissed these observations as normal memory gaps. But then I noticed the timing irregularities. According to the camera timestamps, I would go to bed at my usual time, around 11:30 p.m., and remain there until my alarm rang at 6:30 a.m. 7 hours of continuous sleep, exactly what the footage showed. But my subjective experience told a different story. I was waking up exhausted, feeling like I'd been active all night. My body ached in ways that suggested movement and exertion, not rest. The contradiction bothered me enough to start staying awake and monitoring the live feed. That's how I discovered I was watching myself sleep while sitting in the kitchen, fully conscious and definitely not in bed. On the screen, my sleeping form shifts slightly, rolling from my left side to my back. The movement looks natural, automatic, exactly how I might move during normal sleep. But I can feel myself sitting in this wooden chair, can taste the bitterness of cold coffee on my tongue, can hear the hum of the refrigerator behind me. I'm simultaneously sleeping and awake, observed and observer in two places at once. I check the other camera feeds to see if there's some logical explanation. The exterior cameras show my house surrounded by the familiar landscape of suburban streets and sleeping neighbors. Nothing unusual. The interior cameras show empty hallways and rooms, except for the bedroom, where I continue to sleep peacefully while sitting here watching myself. The timestamp updates 2s and 4/3, 8th and 03 a.m. I stand up and walk to the bedroom, leaving the laptop open on the kitchen table. The journey takes maybe 30 seconds down the hallway, past the bathroom, through the bedroom doorway. The room is empty. No one in the bed. The sheets are pulled back as if someone recently got up, but there's no residual warmth, no indication that the bed has been occupied recently. I return to the kitchen and check the laptop screen. The footage still shows me sleeping. The timestamp now reads 2:49 and 17 a.m. It's tracked the time perfectly during my absence. On screen, my sleeping form is exactly where it was before, lying in the same position, breathing with the same steady rhythm. But the bed is empty. I just confirmed it. I grab my phone and open the security app, checking if there's some delay or caching issue with the live feed. The mobile app shows the same footage me, sleeping peacefully in a bed that I know is unoccupied. I refresh the feed, restart the app, even toggle between cameras to see if there's a technical glitch affecting the display. The footage remains consistent. According to every camera in my security system, I am currently asleep in my bedroom. I walk back to the bedroom and stand directly in front of where the camera shows my sleeping form. I wave my arms, jump up and down, turn the lights on and off. None of these actions appear on the security footage. The camera continues to show me sleeping undisturbed, as if I'm not there at all. But when I return to the laptop, I can see my sleeping form reacting to disturbances that aren't visible on the feed. My on-screen self shifts position slightly, as if responding to the movements I made in the empty room. The sleeping figure's breathing becomes more irregular, as if awareness is seeping into dreams. The camera is recording something that isn't physically present, while failing to record my actual presence in the room. I decide to conduct a more systematic test. I return to the bedroom with a notebook and pen, positioning myself where the camera shows my sleeping body. Speaking aloud, I describe everything I'm doing. I'm standing next to the bed. I'm touching the pillow. I'm sitting on the edge of the mattress. On the laptop screen, my sleeping form responds to each action. When I touch the pillow, the figure's head moves slightly. When I sit on the bed, the sleeping body shifts as if accommodating another presence. My spoken words cause the figure to stir restlessly, as if hearing sounds in dreams. But the camera never shows me, only the responses to my presence. The implications make my hands shake as I write notes. Either the camera is malfunctioning in an impossibly specific way, or I'm experiencing some form of dissociation that allows me to exist in two states simultaneously. Neither explanation makes rational sense. I check the time 3:23 a.m. I've been conducting experiments for over 30 minutes, but I don't feel tired. If anything, I feel more alert than usual, hyper-aware of my surroundings and the contradictions they contain. On the laptop, my sleeping form appears to be dreaming. The figure's eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids, and there are subtle facial expressions that suggest active dream states. I wonder what I'm dreaming about, if the sleeping version of myself is aware of being watched. As if responding to this thought, the figure on screen turns toward the camera, still sleeping, eyes still closed, but now facing directly toward the lens with an expression that seems almost knowing. The sleeping face appears peaceful, but somehow alert, as if aware of observation even in unconsciousness. I minimize the security feed and open a web browser, searching for explanations of what I might be experiencing. The search results offer various possibilities: sleep disorders, dissociative episodes, carbon monoxide poisoning, electromagnetic interference with camera equipment. None of these explanations adequately account for the specific details of what I'm witnessing. But then I find references to a phenomenon called surveillance feedback loops, theoretical situations where monitoring systems create artificial realities that replace actual events. The concept is mostly discussed in science fiction contexts, but some researchers have suggested that intensive self-monitoring could potentially create psychological states where perceived reality becomes disconnected from physical reality. The theory suggests that constant observation of oneself could create a split in consciousness, where one part of the mind becomes the observer and another part becomes the observed. Over time, this split could become so pronounced that the two states operate independently. According to this theory, I might be experiencing a form of dissociation triggered by my own surveillance system. But that doesn't explain why the camera records me sleeping when I'm not in bed. I return to the security feed, which now shows a more disturbing development. My sleeping form is no longer alone in the bed. There's a second figure beside me, indistinct and shadowy, but definitely present. The timestamp shows 3:51 a.m. I rush back to the bedroom, but it's still empty. Just rumpled sheets and the impression of a single body, not two. Yet the camera feed clearly shows two figures sharing the bed, myself and someone else. The second figure is harder to make out than my own image. It appears to shift and blur whenever I try to focus on it, as if it exists on the edge of the camera's ability to detect presence. But it's definitely there, and it's definitely interacting with my sleeping form. I watch as the shadowy figure reaches out and touches my sleeping face. On screen, my expression changes, not waking, but responding to contact in dreams. The touch appears gentle, familiar, as if this interaction has happened many times before. Who is the second figure? Where does it come from? And why can the camera see it when I can't? I spend the next hour documenting everything I observe, taking screenshots and making detailed notes about the interactions between my sleeping form and the shadowy companion. The relationship between the two figures appears intimate and comfortable, suggesting a long-standing connection rather than a recent development. But I have no memory of sharing my bed with anyone. I live alone, sleep alone, wake alone. Or at least I thought I did. As dawn approaches, I notice changes in both figures on the screen. My sleeping form begins to stir more restlessly, as if natural waking time is approaching. But the shadowy figure starts to fade, becoming less distinct until it's barely visible against the sheets. At exactly 6:30 a.m., my alarm rings from the bedroom. On the security feed, my sleeping form responds naturally, reaching out to turn off the alarm before sitting up and stretching. A perfectly normal waking routine. But I'm still sitting in the kitchen, having been awake all night. I watch as my on-screen self gets out of bed and walks toward the bathroom, disappearing from the bedroom camera's view. The bed is left rumpled and empty, showing clear evidence of occupancy by two people despite my certain knowledge that I haven't been there. I wait to see if my on-screen self will appear in other camera feeds as it moves through the house. But the other cameras show only empty rooms. Whatever presence the bedroom camera detects doesn't register on the rest of the surveillance system. My phone buzzes with a notification from the security appy. Motion detected in bedroom. Recording saved to cloud storage. I check the notification timestamp. 6:30 a.m., exactly when the alarm went off and my sleeping form began moving. But I've been watching the feed continuously all night. There was motion in the bedroom throughout the entire period, not just at 6:30 a.m. Why did the system only register motion at that specific moment? I review the saved recordings from previous nights, looking for patterns I might have missed. The footage consistently shows me sleeping normally, but now I notice details that escaped my attention before. Subtle signs of a second presence, impressions in the sheets that suggest dual occupancy, movements that appear to be responses to unseen interactions, changes in sleeping position that seem to accommodate someone else's presence. The second figure has been there all along. I just wasn't looking carefully enough to see it. But what bothers me most isn't the presence of this shadowy companion. It's the growing realization that my waking self might be the anomaly. What if my true existence is the sleeping form recorded by the camera? What if this conscious, wakeful state I'm experiencing is the illusion, a dissociative episode that allows me to observe my real life from outside it? The security system might not be recording false images. It might be showing me the truth, while my conscious mind creates elaborate rationalizations to avoid accepting that reality. I am sleeping in my bed, sharing it with someone whose presence I've forgotten how to perceive directly. And this wakeful observer, sitting in the kitchen and documenting impossible contradictions, might be nothing more than a fragment of consciousness that refuses to surrender to sleep and dreams, and the companionship that waits there. The coffee has been cold for hours, but I take another sip anyway, tasting the bitterness of a night spent watching myself live a life I don't remember. Tonight I'll watch again, and maybe, eventually, I'll understand which version of myself is real. Story 10. The static crackles through the radio at 11:47 p.m., just as it has every night for the past 3 weeks. I adjust the frequency dial with fingers that have grown familiar with this ritual, seeking the weather service broadcast that never comes. Outside my station, perched high above the canopy on metal stilts, the forest breathes in the darkness. My name is David Chen, and I am the night observer at Weather Station 7, deep in the Cascade Mountains. At least, that's what my identification badge says. Some nights, when the fog rolls thick between the trees and the instruments hum their electronic lullabies, I wonder if names matter anymore in a place like this. The temperature gauge reads 68.3 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity sensor shows 47%. The barometric pressure holds steady at 30.15 inches of mercury. These numbers have not changed in 72 hours, 13 minutes, and counting. The digital display glows green in the darkness of my small cabin, casting shadows that seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. I tap the glass face of the hygrometer with my pen, a nervous habit I've developed. The needle doesn't move. It never moves, not for that particular sector. Grid reference 47°23, 18N, 121°107, 42W, a perfect square kilometer of forest where the weather refuses to change. The coffee in my thermos has grown cold, but I pour another cup anyway. The liquid steams in the cool night air, and I listen to the familiar sounds filtering up through the observation windows. Owls call to each other across the void between trees. Something small scurries through the underbrush below, rustling leaves that sound crisp despite the moisture readings. A branch creaks somewhere in the distance, a low wooden moan that carries on the wind. But from that one sector, silence. I walk to the north, facing window, and peer down into the canopy. My flashlight beam penetrates perhaps 30 feet before the darkness swallows it whole. Trees down there, Douglas fir mostly, their tops swaying gently in a breeze I can feel on my cheek through the open vent. All except in that one area, where the trees stand perfectly still. The radio crackles again. This time, a voice emerges from the static. My supervisor, Janet, calling from headquarters. Station 7, this is base. David, you there? I key the microphone. Station 7. I'm here, Janet. Any word on the maintenance crew for Sector 12? A pause. Static fills the silence like breathing. Maintenance crew. David, we didn't schedule any maintenance. Are you feeling all right up there? I frown, checking my logbook. The entry is right there, written in my own handwriting. Have maintenance requested for Sector 12 weather instruments. Anomalous readings persist. The date shows 3 days ago, but the ink looks fresh, still slightly wet in the humid air.
Hi. Yes, I'm fine.
Just tired, I guess. Well, get some rest when your shift ends. Remember, Tom relieves you at 6 a.m. The radio goes quiet. leaving me with the gentle hum of the instruments and that persistent silence from Sector 12. I returned to my desk and opened the logbook again, running my finger down the entries. Day after day, the same numbers for that one section, the same perfect, unchanging climate in a forest where everything should be in constant flux. I remember my first week here, how I'd thought the instruments were faulty. I'd filed report after report, requesting calibration checks, replacement sensors, anything to explain the anomaly. But the equipment tested perfectly. The sensors in Sector 12 responded normally to manual tests. It was only the atmospheric readings that remained constant. The pencil feels heavy in my hand as I make tonight's entry. Temperature 68.3 RSF, humidity 47%, pressure 30.5 in Hg. The numbers flow onto the page as if writing themselves, and for a moment, I'm not certain I'm the one moving the pencil. A sound drifts up from below, footsteps on forest floor, the soft crunch of boots on fallen leaves. I freeze listening. The steps are measured, deliberate, moving through the trees with purpose. But the nearest hiking trail is 5 miles away, and no one ventures into these woods at night. I grab my flashlight and scan the forest below. The beam catches movement. A figure walking slowly between the trees, heading directly toward Sector 12. The person appears to be wearing dark clothing, moving with the steady gait of someone who knows exactly where they're going. "Hello," I call out, my voice echoing off the trees.
This is a restricted area.
The figure stops, and I think I see a face turn upward toward my station. But the distance and darkness make it impossible to make out features. For a long moment, neither of us moves. Then the figure raises what might be a hand, waving or perhaps beckoning, and continues walking. I fumble for my radio. "Base, this is Station 7. We have a trespasser in Sector 12, static." Then Janet's voice, but it sounds different somehow, more distant. "Station 7, please repeat." "Did you say Sector 12? "Yes, someone's walking around down there. I can see them with my flashlight." A longer pause this time. "David, there is no Sector 12. The words hit me like cold water. I check my instruments again, my logbook, the grid map posted on the wall above my desk. Sector 12 is clearly marked, its boundaries traced in red ink. My own handwriting labels it anomalous zone, constant climate readings. Janet, I'm looking at my map right now. Sector 12, grid reference 47Gri2318 N 121Zri0742W. Silence stretches across the radio waves. When Janet responds, her voice sounds concerned. "David, that grid reference? That's where the old station used to be. Station 12 was decommissioned 15 years ago after the accident." My hands begin to shake. "What accident?" "The night observer went missing. David Chen. They found the station empty, but all his equipment was still running. Weather readings from that sector stopped coming in after that night. The radio slips from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. I stare at my reflection in the dark window. Pale face, tired eyes, the same features I've worn for 32 years. But now I notice other things. The way my breath doesn't fog the glass despite the cool air. How my coffee cup leaves no heat signature on the metal desk. The fact that I haven't eaten anything in... How long has it been? I look down at my logbook again. The handwriting that I thought was mine wavers and shifts on the page. The dates become meaningless. Yesterday could be 15 years ago, or tomorrow. Time moves differently here, in this place between places. The footsteps below have stopped. I shine my light downward and see the figure standing directly beneath my station, looking up. Now I can make out the face clearly. Young, concerned, wearing the same Weather Service uniform I have on. The same face I saw in the mirror this morning, or perhaps 15 years ago. He waves again, and this time I understand. He's not beckoning me down. He's saying goodbye. The new observer, the one who will record the unchanging weather in Sector 12, documenting the perfect climate that exists only in the space between what was and what is. I wave back, and the figure nods once before disappearing into the trees. The radio crackles back to life. A different voice now, younger, bass. This is Station 7. Beginning night observation shift. All instruments reading normal. I try to respond, but no sound comes from my throat. My hand passes through the microphone like mist. The temperature gauge still reads 68.3 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity holds at 47%. The barometric pressure remains a constant 30.55 inches of mercury. In Sector 12, where time stands still and the weather never changes, I continue my watch. Outside, the forest breeze in the darkness, and somewhere far below, a new observer settles in for his first night of recording the impossible. He'll notice the anomaly soon enough, file his reports, request maintenance that will never come. And I'll be here, trapped in the perfect climate of my own making, where the air never moves and the temperature never varies, waiting for the next observer to take my place in the endless cycle of watching and recording and slowly forgetting who we used to be. The logbook lies open on my desk, pages fluttering in a breeze that doesn't exist, filled with entries in a handwriting that grows less familiar with each passing hour. But the numbers remain the same, as they always have, as they always will. 68.3 degrees, 47% humidity, 35 inches of mercury, perfect, unchanging, eternal. I lean back in my chair and listen to the silence from Sector 12, where the weather never changes and time means nothing at all. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, and I close my eyes to the sound, knowing that when I open them again, the numbers will be exactly the same. They always are. Story 11. The last guest checked out at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Their rental car disappearing down the winding gravel road that connects Whispering Pines retreat to the outside world. I watched from the main lodge window as their red sedan grew smaller and smaller, until the forest swallowed it completely, leaving only the sound of settling dust and my own quiet breathing. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am the caretaker of this collection of rental cabins nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. For the past 8 years, I've maintained these 12 rustic structures, cleaning between guests, checking pipes, replacing burned-out bulbs, and ensuring that visitors can escape to the peace that only true wilderness can provide. It's solitary work, but I've grown to love the rhythm of it, the quiet efficiency of preparing spaces for people to rest and restore themselves. But lately, rest has become elusive, even for me. The guests from Cabin 7 left everything in perfect order, their beds neatly made, towels folded, and hung precisely on the bathroom racks. They'd swept the wooden floors, washed their dishes, even emptied the waste baskets. Model guests, the kind who make my job easy. The Hendersons, a middle-aged couple from Charlotte who'd spent 4 days hiking the nearby trails and reading on the screened porch. I locked the cabin behind me and walked back to my own small quarters, adjacent to the main lodge, my footsteps loud on the creaking porch boards. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows that danced with the gentle mountain breeze. Everything felt normal, peaceful, exactly as it should be. It was around 9:30 that evening when I first heard the footsteps. I was washing dishes at my kitchen sink, listening to the familiar chorus of night insects and the distant hoot of a barred owl when the sound drifted through my open window. Slow, measured steps across wooden flooring, the distinctive creak of someone walking through cabin 7. I dried my hands on a dish towel and stepped outside, scanning the cabin row. Dark windows stared back at me like empty eyes. No lights, no movement, no rental cars in the designated parking spaces. Yet the footsteps continued. A rhythmic creak pause, creak that seemed to follow the exact path through the cabin. From bedroom to bathroom to kitchen to living area. I grabbed my flashlight and walked over, my bare feet silent on the cool grass. The cabin sat in darkness, exactly as I'd left it 6 hours earlier. I shone my light through the windows, illuminating the empty rooms beyond. Furniture stood in perfect position. The beds remained made. Nothing had been disturbed. But still, the footsteps continued. I tried the door handle, locked just as I'd left it. The deadbolt required a key from both sides, and I kept the only copies on a ring attached to my belt. There was no way anyone could be inside, yet the sound persisted, growing more distinct as I pressed my ear to the door. Bare feet, I thought, or perhaps socked feet, moving with the casual pace of someone familiar with the space. Hello. I called out, knocking on the door frame. Someone in there. The footsteps stopped immediately, as if whoever was inside had frozen mid-stride. I waited, listening to my own heartbeat and the whisper of wind through pine branches. After several minutes, I tried again. This is private property. If someone's in there, you need to come out now. Silence stretched between the trees, heavy and expectant. Then, slowly, the footsteps resumed, but now they seemed to be approaching the door from inside. I heard them cross the living room, pass through the small entryway, and stop just on the other side of the wooden barrier between us. My hand tightened around the flashlight as I stared at the door handle. It remained motionless, but I could swear I felt a presence just inches away, separated only by 2 inches of pine wood. The sensation was so strong, I nearly took a step backward. Who's there? My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. The door handle turned. I watched in frozen fascination as the brass knob rotated slowly from the inside, clicking softly as it reached the limit of its motion. But the deadbolt held, and after a moment the handle returned to its original position. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking slightly as I found the right one. The lock opened with a sharp click that seemed unnaturally loud in the night air. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, flashlight beam sweeping across familiar furniture and empty spaces. Nothing. The cabin was exactly as I'd left it, spotless, vacant, untouched. I walked through each room, checking behind furniture, inside closets, even under the beds. The windows were all locked from the inside, their screens intact. There was simply no way anyone could have entered or left. Yet, when I stood still and listened, I could swear I heard breathing that wasn't my own. I left the lights on when I locked up again, though I couldn't say exactly why. Walking back to my quarters, I tried to rationalize what I'd experienced. Old wood settles and creaks. Mountain cabins are full of sounds that can seem almost human in the darkness. The elevation changes, temperature fluctuations. These things can cause buildings to shift and sigh in ways that might resemble footsteps to an overtired caretaker. But that night, lying in my bed with the windows open to catch the cool mountain air, I heard them again. The same measured pace, moving through cabin 7 as if following a familiar evening routine. Footsteps that walked from bedroom to bathroom, paused at the kitchen sink, then settled into what sounded like the creak of someone sitting down in the living room recliner. This pattern repeated for the next 3 nights. Every evening around 9:30, the footsteps would begin. By now, I'd grown oddly accustomed to the sound, even finding a strange comfort in the routine. The presence in cabin 7 seemed peaceful, non-threatening, more like a benevolent spirit, going about its nightly habits than anything malicious. On Thursday, new guests arrived. The Williamses, a young couple from Atlanta who'd booked cabin 7 for a long weekend. I helped them carry their luggage up the steps, showed them how to work the temperamental shower faucet, and pointed out the hiking trail markers visible from their back window. "What a peaceful place," Mrs. Williams said, breathing in the pine, scented air. "So quiet. I bet we'll sleep better here than we have in months." I smiled and handed them the keys, warning them about the local wildlife and reminding them to keep the doors locked. As I walked away, I wondered what they would think of their nocturnal companion. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Around 11 p.m., urgent knocking echoed from my front door. Mr. Williams stood on my porch in his pajamas and robe, his face pale in the glow of my porch light. "Mitchell, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but there's someone in our cabin." I invited him in, pouring coffee while he explained. They'd gone to bed around 10:30, both tired from their drive up the mountain. Mrs. Williams had fallen asleep quickly, but he'd lain awake listening to the unfamiliar forest sounds. Then, around 11, he'd heard footsteps in the living room. I thought maybe it was my wife getting up for water or something, but when I looked, she was sound asleep right beside me. The footsteps continued for maybe 10 minutes, just walking back and forth out there. I checked all the doors. They're locked. The windows, too. But I know someone's moving around in there. I followed him back to cabin 7, where we found Mrs. Williams sitting on the front steps in her nightgown, arms wrapped around her knees. "I woke up when he got out of bed to investigate," she said. "That's when I heard them too. Footsteps and something else." "What else?" She looked up at me with wide eyes, humming. Someone was humming a lullaby. The 3 of us stood outside the cabin, listening. From within came the gentle sound of movement, not hurried or furtive, but casual, as if someone was simply going about their evening routine. And underneath it, barely audible, a soft melodic humming that seemed to drift from room to room. "We can't stay there," Mr. Williams said. "I mean, we're not asking for a refund or anything, but could we maybe move to a different cabin?" I relocated them to cabin 3, helping carry their luggage by flashlight. They were apologetic, embarrassed about being frightened by what were probably just normal building sounds. I assured them it was no problem, though I didn't mention that in 8 years of caretaking, I'd never had a guest report anything like this. After they settled into their new accommodations, I returned to cabin 7. The footsteps had stopped, but I unlocked the door and went inside anyway, turning on all the lights and walking through each room. Everything was exactly as it should be. Beds unslept in, bathroom clean, kitchen untouched. But in the living room, the recliner was warm, as if someone had just been sitting in it. Over the weekend, the Williamses mentioned hearing similar sounds from their new cabin. Gentle footsteps in the early morning hours. The soft sound of someone moving carefully through the space. They seemed less frightened now, more curious than anything else. It's like whoever it is doesn't want to wake us up. Mrs. Williams observed on Sunday morning as they prepared to leave. The footsteps are so careful, so considerate, almost protective. After they departed, I spent the afternoon cleaning both cabins they'd occupied. In cabin 3, I found something that made me stop and stare. A small pile of wildflowers on the nightstand, arranged with obvious care. Mountain laurel and wild azalea, still fresh, their stems cut cleanly, as if by someone who knew exactly how to harvest them. The Williamses hadn't mentioned picking flowers. When I asked, they seemed as puzzled as I was. That evening, I made a decision. Instead of retreating to my own quarters when the footsteps began, I would stay and listen more carefully. I settled into a chair on the main lodge porch, positioned where I could observe all the cabins clearly, and waited. At 9:27 p.m., the sounds began in cabin 7. But tonight, I noticed something I'd missed before. The footsteps weren't random. They followed a specific pattern, a route that spoke of deep familiarity with the space. Bedroom to bathroom for exactly 2 minutes. Kitchen, where something that sounded like dishes clinked softly together for perhaps 30 seconds. Living room, where the footsteps circled twice, before the creak of someone settling into the recliner. Then, silence for exactly 15 minutes before the pattern repeated. But tonight, there was something new. After the third repetition, I heard the soft scrape of the back door opening. I leaned forward in my chair, straining to see through the darkness. A figure emerged from behind cabin 7, indistinct, more shadow than substance, but definitely human in shape and movement. The figure walked slowly to the small garden area behind the cabin, where wildflowers grew in careful beds that previous guests had planted and tended over the years. I watched as it knelt among the flowers, selecting blooms with obvious care and attention. The movements were gentle, reverent almost, like someone maintaining a beloved memorial. After several minutes, the figure stood and walked back toward the cabin, arms full of flowers. But instead of returning inside, it simply faded. One moment it was there, a clear silhouette against the darker forest behind. The next moment, nothing but empty space and the whisper of wind through leaves. The back door never opened again, but I could hear movement inside resuming. The familiar footsteps, now accompanied by what sounded like someone arranging flowers. The soft clink of stems being placed in water. I stayed on the porch until dawn, listening to the gentle sounds of occupancy from an empty cabin. As the sun rose, painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and pink, the sounds gradually faded away. By full daylight, cabin 7 sat in perfect silence. When I unlocked the door that morning, I found fresh wildflowers arranged in a glass on the kitchen table. The same blooms I'd watched the figure gather hours earlier. The arrangement was beautiful, professional-looking, created by someone who clearly loved flowers and knew how to display them. I left them where they were. New guests arrive tomorrow. A family with 2 young children who've booked cabin 7 for a week. I wonder if they'll hear the footsteps, the gentle humming, the careful sounds of someone who seems to watch over this place with quiet love. I wonder if they'll find flowers arranged for their pleasure, or if they'll simply sleep peacefully, unaware of the presence that tends these cabins with such devoted care. Because I'm beginning to understand that whoever walks these rooms isn't a threat. They're a guardian, someone who loved this place so much that leaving became impossible. Someone who continues to care for guests and flowers and the endless small details that make a place feel like home. Tonight, as I write these words, I can hear the familiar footsteps beginning their evening rounds. But instead of fear, I feel something approaching gratitude. In a world where so many places feel temporary and anonymous, Whispering Pines Retreat has acquired something precious. A spirit that will never let it become just another empty building in the woods. The footsteps are circling the living room now, slow and measured, like someone saying goodnight to a beloved space. Tomorrow I'll clean the cabins and prepare for new guests, and if I find fresh flowers waiting in unexpected places, I'll simply smile and leave them where they are. Some guests never really check out, and perhaps that's exactly as it should be. A story 12. The elevator rises with mechanical precision through the heart of Clearwater Sanatorium, its brass arrow tracking past floors 2, 3, 4, and finally settling on 5 with a gentle chime that echoes through the empty corridor. My shift begins at 11 p.m. sharp. When the mountain facility settles into the hushed routine of night care, and the thick forest that surrounds us seems to press closer against the windows. My name is Rebecca Torres, and I am the night nurse for the psychiatric wing of this remote treatment facility. For 18 months, I've walked these polished linoleum floors, checking on patients who've come here seeking peace from minds that won't let them rest. The work is challenging but rewarding. Most of our residents respond well to the combination of therapy, medication, and the profound quiet that only mountain wilderness can provide. Most of them, anyway. Tonight, like every night, I begin my rounds with Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell in room 507. She's been with us for 6 months. A soft-spoken woman in her 70s who suffers from acute anxiety and persistent insomnia. The mountain air was supposed to help her sleep, but instead, she's developed what her daytime therapist calls nocturnal fixations. I knock softly on her door frame. Good evening, Mrs. Hartwell. How are you feeling tonight? She sits by her window in a high, backed chair, gazing out at the dark forest that begins just 20 feet from the building. The room glows softly from a single bedside lamp, casting long shadows that seem to shift with the movement of branches outside. They're gathering again, Rebecca, she says without turning around. More tonight than last night. They know I can see them. I approach her chair slowly, following her gaze out into the darkness. The forest looks impenetrable from here, a wall of pine and fir that blocks out most of the sky. Security lights illuminate the immediate grounds, but beyond that circle of safety, everything dissolves into black void. What do you see out there, Mrs. Hartwell. She presses her palm against the cool glass. The visitors. They stand between the trees, just at the edge of the light, waiting. I look more carefully, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The facility sits in a natural clearing, with perhaps 50 yards of maintained grounds before the forest begins. Our security system includes motion-activated lights along the perimeter, but they rarely trigger. The occasional deer or raccoon, nothing more. How long have you been watching tonight? Since dinner. They started arriving just after sunset, one by one. That tall one there. She points to a spot where shadows cluster beneath a large pine. He was first. Then the woman in the white dress, and the children. Always the children come last. Her voice carries no fear, only a matter of fact certainty that makes my skin crawl more than screaming would. I pull up a second chair and sit beside her, trying to see what she sees. Mrs. Hartwell, you know that sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, especially when we're tired or anxious. Would you like me to close the curtains so you can rest? She turns to look at me for the first time since I entered, her eyes clear and alert. Rebecca, dear, I know what people think. I know what the doctors write in their files. But tell me something. Why do the motion lights never activate? Even though I watch figures moving right through their sensor range. The question catches me off guard. I've noticed the same thing during my rounds. Patients in multiple rooms claiming to see activity in the forest, but the security lights never responding. Our head of security, Martin Kowalski, insists the system works perfectly and tests it weekly. The sensors might not be calibrated for. For what? For people who aren't quite there. Mrs. Hartwell smiles sadly. That's what they are. You know, the visitors. People who got lost in these mountains over the years, who never found their way out. They're drawn to this place because they know we understand what it's like to be displaced. I check her chart on my tablet. Medication compliance is perfect. Vital signs normal. No changes in her condition since the last evaluation. But her nighttime reports have grown more detailed and specific over the past few weeks, filled with descriptions of individuals she claims to see regularly. Have you mentioned this to Dr. Peterson? Of course. He adjusts my medication and suggests I spend less time at the window. But Rebecca, they don't come to frighten me. They come because they're lonely, and they know I can see them. When I acknowledge them, just a small wave or nod, they seem. She turns back to the window and raises her hand, fingers moving in a gentle wave. Good evening, Thomas. Yes, I see you there by the birch tree. I follow her gaze and feel my breath catch. For just a moment. I think I see something. A darker shape among the shadows, roughly human in proportions. But when I blink and look again, there's nothing but trees and darkness. I should check on the other patients, I say, standing quickly. Of course, dear. But before you go, she reaches out and touches my hand. Room 502 has been having the same dreams as me. Ask her about the visitors. Ask her about the children who wave from the tree house that isn't there anymore. I leave Mrs. Hartwell at her vigil and walk down the softly lit corridor to room 502. Jennifer Moss, age 28. Admitted 3 months ago for treatment of post-traumatic stress following a car accident. She's been responding well to therapy and was scheduled for discharge next week. I find her wide awake, sitting cross legged on her bed with a sketchpad balanced on her knees. Her pencil moves in quick, sure strokes across the paper. Hey, Jen. Still having trouble sleeping. As she looks up, brushing a strand of dark hair from her eyes. I keep having this dream about children playing in the forest. They wave at me from a tree house built between two big oaks. But when I try to wave back, I wake up. My pulse quickens. Can you describe the tree house? It's simple, like something kids would build themselves. Wooden boards nailed between the branches, with a rope ladder hanging down. The weird thing is, it feels so real in the dream. I can hear the children laughing, see their faces clearly. There's a girl with red pigtails and a boy in a striped shirt. She tears off the top sheet of her sketch pad and hands it to me. The drawing shows exactly what she described. A simple platform built in the crook of two oak trees, with stick figures of children visible on the deck. The detail is remarkable for something supposedly remembered from a dream. Jen, have you been looking out your window at night? Sometimes. Why? I walk to her window, which faces the same section of forest as Mrs. Hartwell's room. What do you see out there? She joins me, pressing her face close to the glass. Trees, mostly. But sometimes, I know this sounds crazy, but sometimes I think I see that tree house. Just for a second, like it's flickering between being there and not being there. We stand together in the quiet room, staring out at the dark forest. The security lights cast their protective circle around the facility, but beyond their reach, the wilderness holds its secrets. I'm about to suggest she try to get some sleep when her hand grips my arm. There, she whispers. Do you see it? I follow her pointing finger to a spot, perhaps 40 yards into the trees, where two large oaks grow close together. For just an instant, I see something that shouldn't be there, the outline of boards and branches, a structure that flickers like a mirage before disappearing back into darkness. I blink hard and look again. Nothing but trees. You saw it too? Jennifer says, not a question but a statement. You saw the tree house. I don't answer, but I don't need to. We both know what we witnessed, even if neither of us understands what it means. My remaining rounds take me past 8 more rooms, and in 4 of them, I find patients awake and staring out their windows. Room 509 Marcus Webb, who insists he sees campfires burning between the trees where no campers could possibly be. Room 511 Sarah Kim, who describes watching figures in outdated hiking gear walking single file along paths that don't exist. Room 515 David Yates, who claims a woman in a park ranger uniform stands beside a tree every night, consulting a clipboard and nodding at something only she can see. Each patient's account is different, but they all share common elements. Figures in the forest who seem aware of being watched, who sometimes acknowledge the observers, who appear to be going about routines or activities that suggest they belong there. By 2 a.m., I've completed my medication rounds and settled into the nurse's station to update patient files. But concentration proves impossible with so many questions circling through my mind. Finally, I call down to security. Martin, it's Rebecca on 5. Can you come up here for a minute? I want to ask you about something. Martin Kowalski arrives within minutes, his heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet corridor. He's worked security here for 8 years, a former police officer who knows every inch of the facility and surrounding grounds. What's on your mind? Rebecca. I gesture toward the corridor of patient rooms. Several patients have been reporting unusual activity in the forest at night. I'm wondering if you've noticed anything on the security cameras. His expression grows guarded. What kind of activity? Movement? Figures? People who seem to be walking around out there after dark. Martin is quiet for a long moment, rubbing his grizzled chin. You know, in 8 years here, I've had a lot of night shift nurses ask me that same question. Always the same thing. Patients seeing people in the forest who aren't picked up by our sensors or cameras. And I've spent hours reviewing footage, walking the perimeter, checking for signs of trespassers. Never found anything concrete. He pauses, studying my face. But between you and me, there have been incidents over the years. What kind of incidents? Hikers who went missing in these mountains, going back decades. Day hikers who took wrong turns and never made it out. A family camping in the 1970s who disappeared without a trace. Scout troops, solo backpackers. Even a park ranger who vanished during a routine patrol in 1995. The corridor suddenly feels colder. How many people? Hard to say exactly. The Forest Service doesn't like to publicize it, but I'd estimate maybe 30 or 40 people over the past 50 years. These mountains can be tricky, easy to get turned around, especially if weather moves in fast. Martin walks to the nearest window and peers out into the darkness. The thing is, this facility was built on what used to be a popular trailhead. People have been getting lost in these woods long before we arrived. I join him at the window. Do you think the patients are actually seeing something? I think, he says carefully, that people who are already dealing with perceptual challenges might be more sensitive to things the rest of us miss. Whether that's psychological or something else, I couldn't say. After Martin returns to his rounds, I find myself drawn back to Mrs. Hartwell's room. She's still in her chair by the window, but now she's speaking softly, as if having a conversation with someone just outside. Yes, I understand you're cold. Winter comes early up here, doesn't it? She pauses, listening to something I can't hear. Oh, 1987. That was a particularly harsh winter. I remember reading about it in the papers. I approach quietly. Mrs. Hartwell. Who are you talking to? She glances at me with a gentle smile. The young man in the red jacket. He's been standing by that maple tree for the past hour. He says he got separated from his hiking group during a snowstorm. Poor thing, he's been trying to find his way back to the parking area for quite some time now. I look where she's pointing and see nothing but an empty patch of ground between trees. But as I watch, one of the security lights flickers momentarily, casting shadows that seem to shift and coalesce into almost human shapes before returning to normal. Mrs. Hartwell, what if I told you I believe you're seeing something real? Her eyes widen with surprise, and what might be relief. You do. I'm starting to think so, yes. But I also think these visitors might be echoes. Impressions left behind by people who became lost in the forest. She nods thoughtfully. That would explain why they seem so confused, so focused on finding their way out, and why they're drawn to this place. We're the closest thing to civilization for miles. I pull my chair closer to hers. Do they ever try to communicate? Beyond what you've described? Sometimes they mouth words I can't quite make out, The children are the most active. They play games, build things with sticks and leaves. But they all seem to be waiting for something or someone. As if summoned by her words, Jennifer appears in the doorway, wrapped in her bathrobe. "Rebecca," I heard voices. "Is everything okay?" I gesture for her to join us. "Jennifer, I want you to look out this window and tell me what you see." She moves to stand behind our chairs, hands resting on the window sill. For several minutes, we sit in comfortable silence, 3 women gazing into a forest that might hold more than any of us originally believed. "Here," Jennifer whispers suddenly. "The tree house, it's back." I follow her gaze and see it clearly now, not a hallucination or trick of light, but a solid structure nestled between 2 oak trees. Wooden boards, a rope ladder, and tiny figures moving on the platform. Children who wave when they notice us watching. The boy in the striped shirt. Jennifer continues, her voice filled with wonder. He's calling to someone below, like he's trying to get their attention. Mrs. Hartwell reaches out and places her hand over mine. "They're not lost anymore, Rebecca. They've found each other. The families, the hikers, the children who wandered too far from camp. They've created their own community out there, taking care of each other." A new voice joins our quiet vigil. Sarah Kim from room 517, drawn by some instinct to witness what we're witnessing. The woman with the clipboard, Sarah says softly, "She's a park ranger, isn't she? She's been taking attendance, making sure everyone's accounted for." I watch as more patients drift into the room, each drawn by the same pull to observe and understand. They arrange themselves by the window, speaking in hushed tones about figures they recognize, activities they've been watching unfold night after night. The campfires Marcus sees. Mrs. Hartwell explains to the group. They're not random. Look at the pattern. They form a circle around the clearing where the old ranger station used to be. And suddenly I can see it all. Not just individual apparitions, but an entire community. People who became lost in these mountains over the decades, who found each other in death as they couldn't in life. They've created a kind of eternal camping trip, a permanent gathering where no one is ever truly alone or forgotten. The most remarkable thing is how peaceful it all seems. No horror, no malevolence, just people going about the business of existence in whatever form they can manage. Children playing, adults tending fires, a dedicated ranger making sure everyone is safe and accounted for. Why can we see them when others can't? Jennifer asks. Mrs. Hartwell considers the question. Perhaps because we understand what it's like to feel lost. We've all been in that place where the familiar world doesn't make sense anymore, where we need guides to help us find our way. As dawn approaches and the forest begins to lighten, the figures gradually fade from view. But they don't disappear entirely. They simply become less distinct, like photographs slowly overexposed to sunlight. The patients drift back to their rooms as the day shift arrives, each carrying a piece of the night's revelations. I complete my final rounds and prepare to leave, but something makes me stop at Mrs. Hartwell's room one last time. She's finally sleeping, curled up in her chair with a peaceful expression I haven't seen since her admission. On the window sill beside her, someone has left a small bouquet of wildflowers, mountain laurel and wild azalea, their stems still damp with morning dew. I don't disturb them. Walking to my car in the pale morning light, I turn back once to look at the forest that surrounds Clearwater Sanatorium. In the growing daylight, it looks perfectly ordinary, just trees and shadows and the natural patterns of wilderness. But I know that tonight, when darkness falls and the patients take up their vigils at the windows, the forest will come alive with its hidden community of the lost and found. Some of my colleagues would say we're enabling delusions, encouraging unhealthy fixations. But as I drive down the winding mountain road toward home, I can't help but think we've stumbled onto something more profound than mere hallucinations. We've found a place where the boundary between worlds grows thin, where the lost can be found and the forgotten can be remembered. And perhaps, in learning to see and acknowledge these gentle visitors from the forest, our patients are finding their own way back to a world that makes sense again. The flowers on Mrs. Hartwell's windowsill suggest that the communication might be flowing both ways. Tonight, I think I'll bring a small gift of my own to leave on the sill. A thank you to the patient watchers in the woods who help our patients feel less alone. After all, we're all just trying to find our way home. Story 13. The third breath, the sound first came to me on a Tuesday evening in March, when the rain tapped its Morse code against the bedroom window and Sarah lay beside me, her breathing steady as a metronome. We had been together for 3 years, sharing this bed for 2, and I knew the rhythm of her sleep like I knew my own heartbeat. But that night, as I lay on my back counting the familiar cadence of her breath, in for 4 counts, out for 6, I heard something else, a third rhythm, slightly offset from ours, weaving between our synchronized breathing like an unwelcome harmony. In 2, 3, 4 out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Sarah's pattern unchanged, my own breathing slower, deeper, and then threading between us like smoke through fingers, another breath entirely. I held my own breath, listening. The rain continued its percussion against the glass. The radiator clicked its metallic tongue. But there it was, soft, deliberate, the sound of lungs filling and emptying in the darkness beside us. When I exhaled, the third breath seemed to mirror me, just a heartbeat behind. When Sarah stirred and her rhythm quickened, this phantom breath remained constant, unhurried, as if it belonged to someone far more patient than either of us. I turned my head towards Sarah. Her face was peaceful in the dim light filtering through the curtains, lips slightly parted, the gentle puff of air escaping with each exhalation, real, warm, alive. But the third breath persisted. I sat up slowly, the mattress creaking beneath my weight. Sarah didn't stir. Her breathing continued 4 in, 6 out, while that other rhythm maintained its own mysterious tempo. I strained my ears, trying to locate its source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, not from Sarah's side of the bed, not from mine, but from the space between us, as if the darkness itself had developed lungs. Standing beside the bed, I held my breath again. Sarah's breathing filled the silence, soft and regular. But underneath it, threading through it, the third breath continued its patient cycle. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, of sharing this intimate space with something uninvited. I walked to the bathroom, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. In the mirror, my reflection looked hollow-eyed, but normal. When I returned to bed, sliding carefully under the covers, the third breath was waiting for me. For the rest of the night, I lay awake listening to this unwelcome symphony. Sometimes the phantom breath would synchronize with mine, and I would feel a strange comfort, as if I were no longer alone with my insomnia. Other times it would fall into rhythm with Sarah's, and jealousy would curl in my chest like smoke. Morning came gray and hesitant through the curtains. Sarah woke with a stretch and a yawn, rolling toward me with sleepy eyes. "You look terrible," she said, pressing her palm to my forehead. "Bad dreams." I wanted to tell her about the third breath. But how do you explain something that sounds like madness? Instead, I kissed her temple and said I'd had trouble sleeping. That day at work, I found myself listening for phantom sounds, extra footsteps in the hallway, additional voices in crowded rooms. But it was only in our bedroom that the third breath made itself known, as regular and reliable as the sunrise. Night after night, it returned. I began to anticipate it, lying in bed with my ears straining before Sarah had even fallen asleep. Sometimes I would try to match its rhythm, breathing in when it breathed in, holding when it held. During these moments, I felt connected to something vast and patient, something that had been breathing long before I was born and would continue breathing long after I was gone. Sarah noticed my growing exhaustion, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I would startle at sudden sounds. She suggested seeing a doctor, maybe getting a sleep study done. I nodded and made appointments I didn't keep, because I was beginning to understand that the third breath wasn't something wrong with me. It was something right with the world, something I had simply never noticed before. How many rooms had I slept in without hearing the breath of the house itself? How many nights had I ignored the respiratory rhythm of existence? The thought should have been comforting, but it wasn't. On a Thursday night in April, exactly 1 month after I first heard it, the third breath changed. Instead of its usual patient rhythm, it began to match mine exactly, not following, not leading, but breathing with me in perfect synchronization. When I held my breath, it held. When I exhaled sharply in surprise, it echoed the sound precisely. I sat up in bed, heart racing. The third breath sat up too, or seemed to. I could hear the rustle of sheets that weren't Sarah's, the creak of mattress springs under weight that cast no shadow. Sarah continued sleeping, her breath unchanged, 4 in, 6 out. But now there were 2 of me breathing in the darkness. I stood up slowly, listening. The phantom breath stood with me. I took a step toward the bathroom and heard the whisper of feet following on the hardwood floor. In the mirror, only my reflection stared back. But I could hear another person breathing behind my shoulder, perfectly synchronized with my own rapid, frightened rhythm. When I returned to bed, I lay very still, trying to understand what was happening to me. Was I losing my mind? Was this some kind of breakdown? A stress manifesting as auditory hallucinations? But the breathing was so real, so present. I could almost feel the warmth of another body beside me, could almost sense the rise and fall of a chest that matched my own. "Who are you?" I whispered into the darkness. The third breath paused, just for a moment. Then it resumed, and I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. A whisper, soft as silk, matching the rhythm of the breath. "Who are you?" Sarah stirred, muttering in her sleep. Her breathing pattern shifted, becoming shallower, faster. But the third breath, my echo, continued its patient questioning. Who are you, who are you, who are you, oh? The words weren't spoken aloud. Not exactly. They rode on the breath like meaning rides on wind, barely perceptible but undeniably there. I covered my ears, but the whisper continued. Not coming from outside, but from within, as if my own lungs were asking questions I couldn't answer. Days blended into nights. I stopped trying to sleep, instead lying in bed listening to the conversation between my breath and its echo. Sarah grew worried, then frustrated, then distant. She began staying late at work, coming home to find me sitting up in bed, staring at nothing. Talk to me, she pleaded. Tell me what's wrong. But how could I explain that I was no longer sure who was doing the breathing and who was the echo? Sometimes I would catch myself asking the question, who are you? And not know if the words came from my mouth or from the darkness. The night Sarah didn't come home, the third breath was louder than ever. It filled the bedroom with its questioning rhythm, breathing in doubt and exhaling confusion. I found myself answering, whispering back into the darkness. I don't know. I don't know who I am. And the breath would pause, considering before asking again. Who are you? I began to suspect that I was the echo. That somewhere, in some other bed, in some other room, the real me was lying awake listening to phantom breathing, wondering who was asking questions in the darkness. Maybe I was the third breath in someone else's story. The uninvited presence breathing between two lovers who couldn't hear me. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, it brought a strange peace. If I was an echo, then at least I existed. If I was a phantom breath, then at least someone was listening. In the vast darkness of the world, breathing is proof of presence, and presence is proof of being, even if that being is only the shadow of someone else's existence. Sarah returned 3 days later to collect her things. I watched from the bed as she packed, listening to the sound of her breathing, so familiar, so real. She moved efficiently, not looking at me directly. I can't do this anymore, she said, folding clothes into a suitcase. You need help. Professional help. I nodded, understanding. She was right. Of course. But I also knew that no amount of help would silence the third breath. It had become part of me now, or I had become part of it. We were inextricably linked, the questioner and the questioned, the breath and its echo. After she left, the house grew quiet, but not silent, never silent, because in the darkness 2 breaths continued their eternal conversation, one asking, one answering, both wondering who was real and who was the shadow. And in the space between question and answer, between inhalation and exhalation, something that might have been me continued to exist, breathing in rhythm with the universe's quiet questions about identity and presence, and the strange comfort of being heard, even by ghosts. The third breath had become my first breath, the only breath that mattered. And in the darkness, we breathed together, forever asking, and never quite answering the only question that had ever mattered, who are you? Who are you? Who are you?